Labor and its uniting power, its strength, its weakness, its greater strength. A great people's movement is now the only power that will save and redeem the nation. I think there is no more significant factor in the getting ready for this great purpose than the splendid companies of men that are bringing themselves together in our labor unions and brotherhoods and federations. And among them is, it must be said, some of our princely citizenship. I know that there are various opinions held in regard to the purposes and even the good of our labor unions. This can be said, however, and without any fear of successful contradiction, that those who know most of them and what they have accomplished, and most of the business and labor world in general, realize the splendid results they have already achieved and the equally important work that is yet before them. Certainly upon their wise and intelligent growth and development depends much that will make for the highest welfare of our coming institutions. I know that there are those who have doubted even the right of labor combining in this way, to say nothing of the expediency of it. It is not only right and expedient, as I view it, that labor should so organize, but it is also absolutely necessary that it do so. Necessary not only for its own good and welfare, but also for the good and the welfare of the very nation itself. It has been the history of labor that what it has gained for itself, and it has gained much, it has gained entirely through its own efforts. Those who are at all acquainted with the conditions of labor in times past, and especially prior to the present century, know out of what a condition of bondage it has gradually lifted itself. It was at one time in that condition in which it had literally no rights that were considered as belonging to human beings. Before considering the matter further, it is interesting to note that in the industrial world, the captains of industry, the employers, had this same fight for liberty and for justice, and they are now, mark you, not such a great ways ahead of that larger class called wage workers. Concerning this, an eminent authority has said, in ancient times, particularly in the Roman and the medieval world, a manufacturer or merchant, though his ships might cover the inland seas, though thousands of men might be doing his bidding, yet he had no voice in the government, was not considered fit for a gentleman and patrician to associate with, had no voice in making the laws that should govern him, nor in determining what taxes he should pay. He was plundered indirectly by means of taxation, and when this did not suit the purpose of dissipated and rapacious officialism, he was plundered directly. To be born a patrician, to be a member of the priesthood, or a successful military chieftain, entitled a man to rule. The man who supplied the world with necessaries had no social or political standing, and this continued to be so throughout the Middle Ages, continued to be so in almost all Europe till toward the end of the last century, and is to a great extent still the case in Russia and in the Turkish provinces of Europe. In England, the employer acquired his rights earlier, and has for some time had a voice in the government. But even in England, the much-praised Magna Carta was not for the benefit of either employer or workman, but simply of the nobility, the idle, who, by reason of the accident of birth, were enabled to appropriate the labor of others. Continuing and speaking also of the early conditions of the wage workers, he says, but, upon the whole, the employer in his struggles for justice is not a century in advance of the class we today call the wage workers, and they, the laborers, were in ancient and later times practically all slaves. To be sure, we catch here and there, in ancient literature, a phrase about the laborer being worthy of his hire, but when we examine into the actual condition of the toiling masses, we are forced to treat such utterances as the emanations of fancy, for not only was the labor of the masses at the absolute disposal of the master, but practically, and in everyday experience, their lives were also. True, there was in most countries a law providing that the master should not kill his slave, but if the master did so, he generally went unwhipped of justice. This continued to be the condition, with slight exceptions, throughout all Europe down to near the beginning of this century. For unnumbered centuries they were absolute slaves, belonging to individuals. Then they belonged, as it were, to the soil, and were known as serfs, and, in time, in England they may be said to have belonged to the county or shire. In 1360, during the reign of Edward III, it was provided by law that if a laborer refused to work for the wages fixed by law or by the justices of the county, or if he went outside of the county, he was to be brought back by the sheriff, was to be imprisoned, and was to have the letter F branded with a hot iron upon his forehead in token of his falsity. If he sought by any manner to increase the rate of wages, he was to be imprisoned. From that time on, for 4 centuries, the legislation in England is of uniform kind, prohibiting by imprisonment all meetings of workmen, and providing that the justice should fix the wages to be paid in their county. That if any laborer refused to work for the wages fixed by the justices, he was to be put in the stocks. If any laborer was found idle and did not apply himself to work, he was to have the letter V branded with a hot iron upon his cheek, and was to be sold into slavery for 2 years, his children likewise to be sold. And if either he or they ran away, they were to have the letters branded on the cheek with a hot iron, and were to be sold into slavery for life, and were to be fed on bread and water, and it was provided by law that they were to be made to work by beating, by chaining, etc., and if they ran away again, they were to suffer death. Children that had worked at husbandry till they were 12 years old were forbidden ever to attempt to do anything else. Other children were required to follow the occupation of their parents or be imprisoned. It is hard to conceive of a condition of the laboring classes that could be much worse than that of the English during these centuries. And so far as the length of the workday was concerned, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth, in 1562, the following statute was enacted. All artificers and laborers being hired for wages by the day or week shall betwixt the midst of the months of March and September be, and continue at their work at, or before 5 of the clock in the morning, and continue at work and not depart until betwixt 7 and 8 of the clock at night, except it be in the time of breakfast, dinner, or drinking. And all such artificers and laborers between the midst of September and the midst of March shall be, and continue at their work from the spring of the day in the morning until the night of the same day, except in the time of breakfast and dinner. So much then for the early conditions of both employer and wage worker. We come on down then to our own time. As the employer class became fully emancipated, they began to take matters into their own hands, and in their relations with those who worked for them, and who were the absolutely essential factor in their business, and who helped make their profits. They had the entire say. They paid the wages they chose. They laid down the conditions under which those working for them did their work. The laborer had practically nothing to say regarding anything. The employers were organizing among themselves. They were getting stronger, and as a rule, it can be truthfully said, more dictatorial. The wage workers then began to take heed. They began to see what was to be gained through organization, through cooperation. They realized that they had grievances of various types, that they were not getting as a rule a fair share in the profits of the enterprise, in which they were as necessary a factor as the element of capital and its management. They also realized that as individuals they had absolutely no way of making any of their wants or grievances known, and that for individuals to act in these matters was not only futile but unsafe for the one or one so acting. Then organization and the uniting of the wage workers in the form of the labor union came into being. In reply to the question, what originally were the conditions and facts which seemed to make necessary the combinations of workmen called labor unions, and which justify their present existence? An officer of one of our larger labor organizations gave the following reply. To describe accurately such conditions and facts would require many volumes dealing with social conditions, social injustice, special privilege, all over the world. The specific fact which made labor unions necessary was this. Wealth was produced as a result of a combination of labor and of intelligent direction. The direction, otherwise the employer, was in absolute control, fixed wages, treated the employee as he saw fit. The employers were also united in their social relationships, their mutual interests, and in other ways. The employees, the workers, were isolated. They had no union. Working from dawn till dark made social intercourse impossible. The unions of workers were formed for the same reason that the Union of States in this country was formed, namely, to give to the individuals forming the union the greater strength that comes from united action, to give them the dignity that comes with escape from a servile condition, to give them the power enabling them to obtain for themselves fair wages, involving comfort and education for their families and leisure for mental improvement for themselves, said the president of the American Federation of Labor in a recent address before the New York Board of Trade and Transportation. The very concentration of wealth and its possession is potent organization, and unless the wage earners, the workers, combined their efforts in unions of labor, their condition today would be such as to shock the mind even in contemplation. That any hope for material improvement, moral advancement, or higher ethical consideration is possible without the organizations of labor few now seriously believe. This is quite in keeping with an utterance of former Governor Washburn of Massachusetts, when he spoke as follows. The fact that there is unrest and dissatisfaction when man is confined to unremitting toil is one of the brightest and most healthy omens of the times. It is an indication that his better nature is struggling for emancipation. It is a hopeful sign of finer and nobler manhood in the future. Such efforts for improvement should never be discouraged, but always encouraged. So much then for the right, the expediency, and the necessity of the wage worker organizing and uniting for protection and for mutual self-help. The labor unions have committed errors, of course. They are committing them today, and plenty of them. Counts of many various types can be made against them. Enemies of or those unfriendly to union labor could, I dare say, compile very long lists of errors and excesses of various kinds. Friends of, and those sympathetic to union labor could compile also a similar list. But this is only natural, for in the early and formative days of any movement, this is practically always true. There is indeed scarcely an exception. No movement or system, especially one involving such complex and such difficult matters to deal with and men in such various stages of development, can start in a fully perfected form, nor is it to be expected. Once it was urged in England that men should not be given their political freedom until they were fully prepared to use it rightly, and until there was no danger of their ever abusing it. This course seemed plausible and reasonable to those advocating it. To it Lord Macaulay replied, "If men are to wait for freedom until they have become good and wise in slavery, they will wait forever." In a similar vein, and speaking directly of organized labor, the Springfield Republican has said, viewed philosophically, it is inevitable that a riot of inexperience and inefficiency should characterize the early stages of labor's organization. No state of society is ever inaugurated with people already perfected for its coming. Republican institutions were not deferred on earth until a people were found entirely capable of running perfect republics. Democracy did not await the advent of a population already fully trained in the arts of self-government. All these things come, and the people most concerned have to develop up to them. Such is the lesson of history. Labor unionism came also, and, in the same way, its adherents have had to discipline themselves by experience in the best methods of organization and conservative management. On the whole, taking into consideration the enormous increase of unionism, it is no more than fair to say that it is constantly gaining in equilibrium and sanity. The unions and their leaders have been learning rapidly in these matters. Generally speaking, the older the union, the more conservative and quiet, and at the same time firm and effective is it in its methods and its dealings. In other countries, in England for example, where the unions are a great deal older, they have even long ago worked through and out of the rash and tempestuous stages, the stages where so many counts could be made against them, and have reached the position that the unions in America have been gradually working their way towards. Here, as there, it has been a long, hard road to travel. It has meant fight and defeat, and at times apparent rout along with the battles won, the experience gained, the advancement made, the present priceless possession. It has meant brave sufferings many times not only on the part of the wage workers, but also on the part of their families. It has meant, at times, the facing of great uncertainty. I think it should be said that from the managers of capital, labor has learned some of its worst features and excesses. I think it can be truthfully said that with all the excesses and violations of law on the part of union labor in times past, it has never, taking it all in all, equaled the amount of disregard for and violation of law that organized capital has been guilty of. It has been more open and awkward in its methods, perhaps, while organized capital, in addition to being in many cases also glaringly open, has worked in a subtle and silent way undercover. The latter is more skilled, it may be said, and hence more apt in these matters. But out of this long and at times apparently clumsy struggle, union labor in this country is also attaining a position where it is exerting a great and powerful good, not only for its own and for the public welfare, but also for organized capital, if the latter is wise enough to openly and freely recognize its power and its purposes. In connection with the final settlement of the great strike in the anthracite field some time ago, there were among others two utterances to me very significant and worthy of a wide reproduction. Judge Gray, chairman of the Arbitration Commission, said, "Unless my judgment is at fault and my faith unfounded, the labor unions will soon have passed through their period of trial and tribulation and will emerge on a bright and sunlit plain, where true American character, the fruit of American liberty, will illustrate the worth of our institutions, purging themselves of every antisocial and unworthy element, recognizing in others the rights they claim for themselves, with malice towards none and charity towards all, subordinate to law, with a full sense of their appeal to the public opinion of the country. As our fathers made their appeal, they will be upheld in the time to come by employers as powerful coadjustors in the maintenance of American ideals of free government among men." Much of the energy of labor unions up to the present time has been directed towards the securing of a larger wage or of a shorter workday, and in some cases towards both. It is quite natural that at first this should be true, but with this gain to a greater or less extent, there comes a time, and it has now come, when it must push out into a larger and more general field. These gained, and with more time for counsel and intercourse, and with a greater recognition of its power and its standing, it is more able now to move upon a broader and still more telling plane. The Union and the Federation has also been an excellent means of training in reason as against crankery, in moderation as against rashness and hot-headedness, in short for a broader and more substantial and effective citizenship. A very discriminating writer, in speaking along this line, has said, "If we omit certain unions in the more corrupt cities, where the leaders learn bad habits by imitation, and are too frequently bought and sold, there is at the present moment in this country no more powerful influence to train men for citizenship than the influences at work in the best and strongest labor organizations. This is true of the Federation. It is true of separate unions like the printers, trainmen, iron molders, many of the longshoremen, and cigar makers. But especially do these older and stronger unions learn to check dangerous and revolutionary opinions. As the trade union strengthens, its influence against turbulent and revolutionary projects steadily increases. The only agency that will prevent the spread of this conservatism is the fatuous obstinacy, which insists upon defeating completer labor organization. The time has come, it seems to me, when organized and federated labor must move, and move in a very effective and telling way along the lines of political action. Not that the union or the federation as such, as an organization, must so act, for this all along it has steadily avoided, and undoubtedly most wisely. There would be pitfalls innumerable for it, did it adopt or attempt to adopt such a course. Nor would anyone of judgment advocate the membership of the union or federation as such affiliating with any particular party. To be independent in party action, here as in the rest of our citizenship should be, as it is getting more and more to be, the great fact. Then for organized labor to work along the lines of educating its membership in the lines of policy and legislation that gives or that keeps for the great common people, of which the wage worker is such a large and powerful factor, larger rights and fairer opportunities and more just conditions, as distinguished from the privileged classes by whom the chief portion of the machinery of government is now dominated and controlled, and in whose interest the larger share of legislation is now enacted. And so far as the immediate demands and the welfare of organized labor is concerned, it seems to me that the time has now come when this is the effective and the telling method of work, also the orderly and the peaceable, hence, the most satisfactory. It is undoubtedly in the matter of strikes and the almost innumerable evils that accompany them that union labor has suffered most in its reputation and to a greater or less extent in its standing. Whether this part of its life could have been lived better or not is of no importance so far as the present consideration is concerned. The one concern at present is the lessons that are to be learned from the past use of this weapon. Undoubtedly, there are many and very important lessons to be learned. Undoubtedly, many have been learned. That strikes have been too frequently called, and especially the sympathetic strike, that others have been called rashly and without sufficient preparation, and without a sufficient consideration of the chances of success beforehand, that others have been too frequently called under a poor or ineffective or self-seeking leadership, is undoubtedly true. The abler leaders and the better and more intelligent members have now come to the position where they recognize that the strike and its attendant circumstances is to be considered only as a weapon of last resort. The disposition, reached partly through very great losses, is now to conciliate, to adjust grievances and differences if any possible way can be found without a resort to the strike. The history of strikes, those lost as well as those won, has brought home to the intelligent and capable and unself-centered leader and union members some very clear-cut facts such as the following: that a strike should not be allowed to be called by a walking delegate or by any power outside of a full and complete vote of the union, that the union should move slowly and with every possible degree of fairness, that it should be thoroughly organized and ready for the strike, that it be under the direction of a thoroughly able and honest and proven leader, that it be sure that its demands or its grievances are thoroughly just and sufficiently important to pay this price for their attainment or their adjustment, that it has come to pass that public opinion is the court or the power that finally decides whether the strike be successful or whether it end in failure. Therefore, in addition to the necessity that the demands be thoroughly just ones, that there be no violence or rioting. True, owners and managers of capital, as well as sympathizers, have provoked or have deliberately planned and provoked violence and rioting, as they probably will in other cases yet to come, but by forbearance and patience the public can in practically all cases eventually be shown its source, and it will render its verdict accordingly. The very fact that this method has sometimes been deliberately resorted to help weaken or break a strike, is itself a powerful and quiet commentary upon the influence and the power of public opinion as the determining factor in a strike. How keen the really able labor leader is in regard to the importance of no violence emanating from the organization in time of strike is shown partly by the following words of John Mitchell, spoken in connection with the anthracite coal strike of several years ago, and not for its effect upon the public, but in earnest counsel to the miners. If you want to spoil your own cause and lose every sacrifice you have made for yourself and your families, give way to your temper and commit some violence. Just a few outbreaks like this and the public goodwill, to which we must look in last resort, will fail us and we shall deserve to lose it. A leader of the keen insight of John Mitchell understands all too thoroughly what the element of violence, emanating from the organization at a critical period of the strike, would mean in its effect upon public opinion. This, however, is not exceptional counsel, but it has grown to be that which is common on the part of the able, experienced, and efficient labor leaders. The very large number of strikes that are prevented through the influence and the clearer counsels of the abler leader and his subordinates is probably not realized by the one not intimately acquainted with organized labor. The following letter by a very able General Secretary of the Garment Workers Union is also indicative of much that is going on at present. Mr. Foreman of ___ informs me that your only reason for calling out the men was that he refused to continue in his employ 2 men laid off for incompetent work, and that even your business agent admitted that the work of the men was imperfect. If such is the case, your action in withdrawing the men was not justified. This office, as well as the National Union, is opposed to forcing upon an employer men whose work is not suitable. It is just that sort of thing that creates needless opposition to the union and causes no end of trouble. Your union is the only one that would make such a demand. Where members are made to believe that they cannot be discharged, no matter what they do, they become careless, and the poor workman falls back upon the protection of the union. The employer has got to sell the goods, and he assumes the risk. Consequently, he alone can be the judge as to the quality of work. As long as he pays the union scale and does not discriminate against active members, that is all you can expect of him. Now I trust you will not place us in a position where the General Executive Board will have to decide against you. I know there are employers who have become very bitter against organized labor. I know also that some, at times, have had to meet some very exasperating things from the unions. This, I think, is owing in great part to 2 causes. The feeling of power that has come to labor since the unions have become a force that must be reckoned with, and again on account of the sort of transitional period through which both employer and worker have been passing, where we have reached the end of the period where the employer has had practically everything to say in connection with the works and the conditions of labor, and where he is now loath to admit that the portion of his establishment, the portion as necessary as his capital, his management, and his machinery, the workman, can have anything to say regarding any feature of his works. But the day has come when the wise owner or manager is he who openly and even cheerfully recognizes this. There are those who have taken this view of the matter, have acted accordingly, and are even now glad that this changed condition has come about. They are managing in such a way that great good is resulting to them as well as to their workmen. The day of my business has passed. The day of our business has arrived. The new industrial era that we are now entering upon is the one in which there shall be more consultation and more friendly cooperation between employer and employee, and where if this method is entered upon freely and with a fuller and more sympathetic recognition of each other's rights and of the amenities due from each to the other, very great mutual gains will be made. The one important factor that must now be looked for by owners of large enterprises and by companies is men as managers who are keen enough to recognize the advent of this new era and who are large enough to meet and deal with labor upon this new basis. It is, after all, but an indication of the possession of a good degree of modern business ability. Speaking along this line, a very able Eastern Railroad president said some time ago, to assume that we have got to go on spasmodically fighting the unions is tactless and unintelligent. The truth is that the kind of man who is not strong enough to work with organized labor has not the qualification for his position. It is silly for powerful corporations to say, we will deal with the individuals, not with representatives of unions. Organization of labor has got to be recognized as such and dealt with as such, and the problem now is to get men with the qualities and capacities to do this. Mr. Darrow, one of the miners' council, in speaking before the Anthracite Commission, spoke possibly more strongly, though not more truly, in the following. Mr. Henry D. Lloyd, also counsel, had just pointed out the fact that the Commission could hope to bring no peace to the anthracite fields that could be in any way permanent unless it provided for agreements with the Union. Mr. Darrow, speaking in regard to the recognition of the Union, said, "You can do just as you please about recognizing the Union. If you do not recognize it, it is because you are blind and you want to bump up against it some more. That is all. It is here. It is here to stay, and the burden is on you and not upon us. There is neither the power nor the disposition in this court, I take it, to destroy the Union. It would not accomplish it if it could, and certainly could not if it would. And if these wise businessmen, with the combined wisdom of business gentlemen and the agents of the Almighty, cannot see the Union, they had better blunder along still a few more years, and possibly after a while they will know it is here and recognize it themselves." I know there is still a great deal of unsettled opinion regarding strikes and lockouts, regarding arbitration, and especially compulsory arbitration. All who are familiar with it, however, are agreed that there is one form of arbitration that is unique in that it leads all other forms. It is what has come to be known as the joint agreement. It might be more accurately spoken of as a form of conciliation than as a form of arbitration, or still more accurately, perhaps, as a form of working agreement between employer and employed. Its basis is that once so often, according to agreement, accredited representatives of both employer and workmen meet in a joint session to consider, to discuss, and to draw up a set of agreements that shall be the basis of the year's or the period's work. The very fact that labor is organized and is capable of sending responsible representatives to such a meeting makes the joint agreement possible. Otherwise, it would not be possible. The joint agreement is preeminently the highest type of arbitration, for it is arbitration from within. The features that mark its high value are many. First are its educational features, in that it makes both employer and employed acquainted with each other's points of view, with each other's needs as well as desires. It leads to a better understanding between employer and workman, probably the greatest need in our modern industrial world. And if entered into heartily, it has the tendency of creating an active sympathy between the two. This in itself will lead in time to a continually increasing mutual respect and mutual helpfulness. Again, agreements thus voluntarily made are far more apt to be kept, and more easily and conscientiously than in case of conditions imposed from without, in which in almost every case are bound to contain some features distasteful and onerous to one party or the other. Again, it is simply a recognition of a purely common sense and practical method that is recognized and used in practically every other avenue in the business world. Finally, I think it can be said that there can be no effective relations and no lasting peace between employer and workman until the agreement is recognized as the common sense and fair method of procedure, and is entered into in a whole-souled manner and with the purpose and intention on the part of both interested parties of living fully up to the agreement. The joint agreement is not a new method of conciliation or a new method of procedure as between employer and employed, but in some fields it has been used for many years, and in almost all cases with thoroughly satisfactory results. It can therefore be spoken of from the standpoint of its actual achievements. It is of later years, however, that it has been coming into a more general and into a continually increasing use. This fact is undoubtedly an evidence of its effectiveness and value. There is so much testimony to be had in regard to its effective and satisfactory results that it would be interesting to consider much of it did space permit. The manager of one of the largest stove manufactories in the country has said of the agreement, "We have tried it a dozen years, and it has settled all questions on this subject for us. Its best trait is that, as it works, it trains the men to see the limits within which they can get advantages. It makes the men more conservative, and it makes us more considerate." Mr. John Graham Brooks, in The Social Unrest, has dealt with the joint agreement in a very effective way. At one place he says, "To keep agreements voluntarily is a much higher discipline than to do it under force. For many years unions have actually kept contracts when employers have genuinely and heartily cooperated with the joint agreement. There is no such convincing proof of this as the 15 years trial between masters and men in the Boston building trades. The agent of the employers, W. H. Sayward, who brought about this agreement, conducting it with growing success for 18 years, allows me to say that under it scores of strikes have been prevented, millions of money saved, and the most delicate questions, like the limitation of output and apprentices, the use of the boycott, the conflicts between different unions, and the sympathetic strike, are now so far understood as a result of this education that they are no longer feared. Mr. Sayward's testimony, in part, is as follows. My experience has convinced me that labor thoroughly organized and honestly recognized is even more important for the employer than for the workman. It makes possible a working method between the two parties which removes one by one the most dangerous elements of conflict and misunderstanding. Speaking further, Mr. Sayward said that either for the building trades or other lines of work, these intricate and involved matters will not take care of themselves. They cannot safely be entrusted to one of the interested parties alone. Both parties must have equal concern, must act jointly, not only in their own interests, but, in effect, in the interests of the community. If at any time differences do arise under the joint agreement, or if they arise when it is not in use and trouble seems imminent, then conciliation or voluntary arbitration is the next sensible step. It is safe to say that there is scarcely a case where the strike or the lockout need be resorted to if there is an eminent spirit of fairness on both sides. Conciliation and fairness. A looking at the matter from the standpoint of the other, a pocketing of pride to gain something larger and fairer and more satisfactory in the end. A getting away from pure fool obstinacy and allowing a spirit of openness and fairness to assert itself and lead to what will prove to be a wiser course and a better end. The workmen to be fair and to be sure they are making no unjust demands, not hasty but considerate of the probable difficulties that lie in the employer's way. Employer to pass rapidly beyond the foolish and inane period where this is my business and I will conduct it absolutely to suit myself. I will not be dictated to. There is nothing to arbitrate. The public is pretty well tired now of there is nothing to arbitrate, and popular disapproval will soon call a halt upon this puerile obstinacy unless owner or manager finds sense enough to abandon it himself. All that is needed to prevent precipitated labor troubles, strikes and lockouts, is for the men in overalls and the owners or managers of industry to grow sufficiently large as to enable them to throw away their prejudices and meet, as they meet in other things, on the common sense platform of fraternity and humanity. Each must manifest the spirit of open fairness, and the more fully this is done, the more smoothly and pleasantly and satisfactorily will the negotiations run. President John Mitchell has given this bit of testimony. I have never seen in my experience a strike that could not have been averted if the employers and the men who work had met in conference before the strike was started. I have said on many occasions that I was opposed to strikes, opposed to lockouts, opposed to industrial turmoil, that I favored peace, but always with the qualification that it must be an honorable peace. There will never be peace between the men who work and those who employ men to work unless that peace guarantees to each side that which is its proper due. Herman Justy, Commissioner, Illinois Coal Operators Association, has said, with scarcely an exception, every strike that has taken place in our time, even where there has been bloodshed and destruction of property, has finally been settled in friendly council. Speaking then of the plan of the Coal Operators Association in their method of joint agreements with their men, which have been in operation for a great many years, Mr. Justy says, our plan is to prevent these senseless and costly strikes, and the many differences and disputes arising between master and men, which seem to place them in the attitude of enemies to each other, are settled in the same manner in which the most destructive strikes are finally settled, viz., by meeting in friendly council, where we try self-control long enough to enable us to say, come, let us reason together. This is, practically, all there is of the plan pursued in the coal mining industry of Illinois, and of this plan to prevent strikes and to promote harmony and good feeling it can be said, at least, that it is the fairest thus far offered. But what a commentary upon the experience of the past 25 or 30 years to know that finally practically all strikes are settled by the very means that could have prevented their ever occurring had more real ability or, to speak more plainly, more plain, ordinary common sense prevailed on one side or the other, or on both. As soon as it becomes apparent that employer and workmen are unable to adjust their differences through conciliation or voluntary arbitration, then by the ordinary course, the strike on the part of the one, or the lockout on the part of the other, is resorted to. What the results sometimes are, when this method assumes control, is well known to all. Upon the public the chief burden is then thrown. It has always seemed to me that right at this point it is the privilege and the duty of the public to have its say. I know that many labor men, and among them some eminent labor leaders, hold a different view. To deprive labor of the power to strike, they believe, and honestly, would be to take from it one of its most effective weapons. I would not deprive labor of its power to strike, and the more thoroughly and closely labor is organized, the greater does this ability become. There is probably no one who believes more thoroughly in the good that is to result both to worker and employer, as well as to the public at large, from a continually growing and developing organization of labor. But the larger good must always be kept in mind, and when the calling of a strike or the instituting of a lockout becomes the supreme necessity, then the principle of compulsory arbitration is undoubtedly a sound one, even as it has proven so completely to be, much that we hear to the contrary notwithstanding, in New Zealand, in Australia, for example. Were employer and workmen the only ones concerned in the matter of compulsory arbitration, then it would present a somewhat, In fact, an entirely different aspect. But even then, I should thoroughly believe in the principle, when the strike or the lockout would appear the only way of adjusting the differences. Men or groups of men in the mad, fighting condition are not as capable of adjusting difficulties as fairly, and there can be no lasting peace unless mutual fairness enters, as an able and impartial body of men selected for this purpose. And the enormous losses entailed upon both sides when the strike is at all long drawn out are, it seems to me, thoroughly ill-advised. The ability to strike enables the workers to bring their difficulties or grievances to the point where, were they not strong enough to possess this ability, they would be in a most deplorable condition. Two men have a difference. The time was when, worked up by rage into a fury, thoroughly mad, one species of temporary insanity, they took their bludgeons and pounded away at the skulls of each other. We have grown. When two men have a difference, they are not allowed to go into the street and bludgeon one another, or deal with one another in the manner of even the modern fisticuff manner. The public has long ago decreed that they take their differences in an orderly and common-sense way before a man or a body of men, more calm and reasoning, and hence more capable of determining the right of the matter at issue. This is our method, the method that we have found far better than the former brute method. There is no one of average intelligence who would even think of appearing in public to advocate a return to the earlier methods. In this, however, the public is scarcely disturbed, or at most but a few persons, and then for but a few moments at most. Fisticuffs are ordinarily not lengthy affairs. Is there not 1,000 times more reason for compelling this same sane, common-sense method when it comes to the disputes not of two men, but of two groups of men that may last for days or even for many weeks, and where the entire community is endangered as to life or limb, where it is inconvenienced and all of its natural and normal relations demoralized, where it is subjected at times to tremendous losses, and where sometimes for weeks it is compelled simply to remain quiet and look on at. These two groups struggling without reason because each is animated by the desire for the questionable glory of saying, "We beat." I am not saying that "we beat" is always the animating principle on the part of the contending parties. That in some cases it is, that in many cases it is all too evident, and sometimes when a struggle of this kind has been entered upon, with the greatest of reasons, it has frequently occurred that as the conflict became extended, the "we beat" business became the controlling principle. The strike or the lockout is too much a matter of vital public concern to enable it to be used upon the slightest pretext on the part of groups of hot-headed men. I say hot-headed advisedly because, were it not true of one side or the other or of both, then a less crude and bungling and a more common-sense method of settlement not only could, but would be found. There was perhaps a justification, or at least a reason, for the bludgeon and the pummeling method of settlement of differences between the two men. In order to reach the period of the reason method, this period had to be passed through. There was also the same justification or reason for the strike and lockout method in the disputes between two groups of men. This crude method was at first natural. We have too much common sense in other matters, and in matters of a very kindred nature to allow it further to be said that this method is any longer necessary, or even natural. We become so accustomed to certain conditions that at times we do not move on as rapidly as is well for us. I beg to repeat the statement that when the strike or the lockout is resorted to, there is a distinct threefold loss, to the worker, to the employer, to the public. Am I right? Some time ago witnessed a strike in Chicago, and it terminated rather to the disadvantage, if anything, of the side that called it. Here are a few facts taken at random from a general summary made immediately after by the Chicago Tribune. Duration in days, 105. Number of garment workers originally involved, 17. Total number of Teamsters eventually involved, 4,620. Persons killed in strike violence, 21. Persons injured, reported by police, 415. Police and deputy sheriffs on strike duty, 5,700. Cost to city and county 4. Extra police and extra deputy sheriff protection, $406,500. Loss to Teamsters in wages, and cost to unions for strike benefits, $1,050,000. Cost to employers, wages and lodging of strike breakers and protection of wagons, $2 million. Shrinkage in wholesale, retail, and freight business, estimated, $6 million. Here then the cost to the unions was a trifle over $1 million. To the employers, $2 million, while the public had to pay to the tune of between $6 and $7 million, besides shouldering all the exasperating inconveniences and a compulsory witnessing of all the diabolical happenings that were thrown in its way. If this virtual defeat for the unions was caused, as it is claimed, by incompetent or self-seeking leadership, so much the worse for the unions that permitted such leadership to hold sway and to lead them into such positions where defeat was almost a foregone conclusion. How long will it take organized labor to learn its lessons along this score? You will recall that in the summer of 1900 there was a streetcar strike in St. Louis. The side in error, the side chiefly to blame in this strike, was the company, and when it was ended the chief defeat was also on its side. In this strike the loss to the men in wages was a trifle less than $500,000. The loss to the company in fares, in operating, and in damage to cars and plant was $2 million. The loss to the city in business alone, to say nothing of loss in extra police and deputy sheriff needs, was $30 million. There were 14 killed, 70 injured by bullets, 150 injured otherwise. Here then is a loss, in money alone of $30 million on the part of the public compared to a combined loss of a little less than $2.5 million on the part of the company and its workmen. Who shall say that the right, or even the duty on the part of the public in this case, is not of a very clear-cut and certain nature? Under the head, The St. Louis Strike Folly, an editorial in the Boston Daily Globe at the conclusion of the strike spoke as follows. This strike was begun innocently enough on May 8th. On that day, 3,500 men stopped work. It was a fight on the part of the company to destroy the labor union. And because the company has succeeded in compelling 300 union men to go back to work and leave the union, and moreover succeeded in importing more than 3,000 men to run its cars day and night, it calls this a victory. A few such victories as this scattered over this continent would create a general civil war, in which victory would finally poise at the point of the federal bayonet. For a corporation to call a settlement forced by such conditions victory is a libel on the English language. Yet the unions, animated by the same spirit that possesses the company, claim a victory, too. No, this is not victory. In this day when reason and the moral sense are supposed to have superseded the gun and the bludgeon, it is defeat, dismal defeat for both the company and the men. The only victory is found in the agreement of both sides to resume their old relations, forgive and forget old scores, and begin all over again to be reasonable human beings. If anybody can conceive of victory after such disgraceful proceedings, where does it come in for the 700,000 people of the town who have been inconvenienced for nearly 2 months and whose losses in business are reckoned at $30 million? How many taxpayers of St. Louis will feel like calling this a victory by and by when the costs have to be settled? This strike has had some features that are liable to sadly demoralize the calculations of corporations who fancy that the victory is won as soon as they succeed in hiring men to take the places of the strikers. This was the case in St. Louis. The company has broken the back of the strike, but in breaking that back it was at the same time depleting its treasury so rapidly that it was forced to make an agreement with the strikers in order to save itself from impending ruin. Such a strike as this ought never again to be possible in this country. It cost the company over $1,500,000 in fares alone for its victory. It cost the men $500,000 in wages. It brought disgrace upon a supposed civilized American city. The fierce boycott has been the cause of cowardly murders and assaults upon women. It has engendered bitterness among families and friends that will rankle for many years to come. And all for what? In order that somebody might finally be able to boast of a victory. Now both parties have fought to a standstill, and both, maimed, crippled, and disgraced, have been forced to an agreement which each calls a victory. How childish and how unworthy of intelligent men. Arbitration could have easily settled all this when it began. Now nothing is settled, except the fact that both sides have virtually been defeated. When will men ever learn anything from these sad experiences? To say that it is advisable longer to allow 2 groups of men to engage in such a disruption of public order and decency, throwing this enormous expense upon the shoulders of the general public, simply because one party or the other, and generally the one least in the right, is so bullheaded, or so lacking in ordinary brain capacity as well as in business insight as to be incapable of adjusting these difficulties without a resort to such clumsy and brutal methods, seems to me to be almost an insult to the most ordinary degree of public intelligence. I don't think there is an average of 1 person in 50 who, cognizant of all the facts, really believes that it is either advisable or possessing even the qualities of the most rudimentary common sense. What a commentary then upon the lack of initiative or movement on our part to allow this method with all its attendant horrors, and with practically nothing in its justification still to be employed. Especially is this true when there is already a clearly demonstrated better method. When all other methods are exhausted, and it comes to the strike on the one hand or the lockout on the other, then compulsory arbitration in the form of an industrial court should step in and take hold of the case and render decision, and the contending parties should renew their original relations as nearly as possible until such decision is rendered. A state board of arbitration, with powers along its line of a nature somewhat similar to those of the Public Service Commission, along its line, and with powers to enforce its decisions where such enforcement is necessary on its part, would bring order and great good out of the present anarchistic and practically criminal conditions that now ordinarily prevail. Time would unquestionably demonstrate the wisdom of the creation of such a board in every state. Some time ago, Carroll D. Wright, then United States Commissioner of Labor, in an article in the North American Review, gave some of his findings in connection with an investigation of the matter of strikes in the United States since 1880. Between 1881 and 1900 there were about 23,000 strikes, which would be an average of more than 1,000 a year. Nearly 51% of all these strikes were successful, 13% succeeded partly, while the remaining 36% failed. Over 6 million employees were involved and were out of work for a longer or a shorter period. Their loss owing to idleness was nearly $258 million. The loss to their employers was about $123 million, or a little less than one-half the loss to them. I have given just the losses from a monetary standpoint, and to the 2 parties engaged in these industrial wars. The still greater losses to the public at large, not only from a monetary standpoint, but in almost innumerable ways otherwise, can be imagined by the aid of the detailed statistics relating to the 2 strikes already mentioned. One of the concluding observations by Mr. Wright in this article is abundantly worthy of notice. It is recognized now that labor conflicts grow out of increasing intelligence. The avoidance or adjustment of such conflicts must be the result of increased intelligence. Fools do not strike. It is only men who have intelligence enough to recognize their condition that make use of this last resort. With increased intelligence, they will look back upon the strike period as one of development, and when they shall have accommodated themselves to the new conditions, and when employers shall have recognized the increased intelligence of their employees. These matters will be handled in such a way as to prevent in the future a repetition of incidents like those which are chronicled in the statistical history of the strikes of the last 20 years. It is generally the case in the majority of strikes that the loss to the workers, who are far less able to stand it, is considerably greater than that sustained by the employers. The latter, moreover, have a way of making the public finally pay their losses, in addition to the still heavier losses that are always thrown upon it. Certainly the word dense is quite applicable to the public unless we take some lessons from this great array of happenings that has come to pass, and unless we now move speedily along the path of an insistence upon compulsory arbitration in that class of cases where no other method of settlement but open industrial warfare is able to be reached by employer and workman. It seems to me there can be no shadow of a doubt in regard to this when it comes to strikes in connection with any public service industry, or anything where the inconvenience or loss to the public is specially great. Organized labor stands at one of the most critical periods in its history at the present time, in this country at least, and, although I believe it is coming through successfully, it nevertheless will receive some strong knocks, and will suffer some severe and entirely unnecessary setbacks, unless some of its worst practices, or rather those of some of its members and sections, are quickly eradicated. Flushed with pride undoubtedly in attaining to the degree of power and recognition it has so far attained to, the members of some groups of organized labor, especially in the larger cities, are already showing marked symptoms of severe attacks of the swelled head, and their conception of their rights is getting so fine that the rights of those employing them and of the general public are now so minimized that they have become of almost microscopic proportions. Especially is this true in those lines of work where the public is concerned rather than the employer of labor and works. And, when organized labor, the union, becomes a shield for incompetent or shirking workmen, or backs them in giving a wholly inadequate day's work for a good high wage, or in carelessness of the rights and amenities due to others, or a reasonable care of their belongings, or when it becomes too technical, or too fine in its rules and its methods and its general program, then it will alienate an intelligent and otherwise sympathetic public, so that its losses will quickly begin to balance its gains, and it will by its own foolhardiness set a limitation to its advance and progress that otherwise could not be set. Wherever the teaching or the influence of the union is for greater gain for the individual members, shorter hours, higher wage, or whatever the gain, if it is not accompanied by that of greater interest and a greater degree of efficiency for the benefit of the employer, whether company or individual employer, the union is doing its members a distinct injury and also an injury to the public. And such a union deserves not only the condemnation, but also the execration of all decent and healthy-minded citizens. Not only does it deserve this, but this it will surely get. If the animating motive is continual getting, with thoughts only of us and ours, without adequate return, and no sense of its relationship with the great public welfare, then it will soon fall into the pit of arrogance and pure self-seeking, without due consideration of the rights of others, rebellion against which was the very thing that brought the labor organization into existence. A permanent organization or institution cannot be built upon any such basis. A labor trust is just as obnoxious to the great common people as is a capitalistic trust, and they will stand for one no more than they will stand for the other. And moreover they will in time find a method of putting down and out of business the one, the same as they surely will the other. And again, if browbeating becomes too dominant a factor, if terrorism and murder and kindred villainous methods become too frequent or habitual, and too fully condoned by organized labor in efforts to coerce other equally honest and worthy men who cannot see their way to sanction all their methods, or still others who are too brave or too manly to sit idly by and see their families driven and pinched by want, then also a suicidal blow will be struck that will be a tremendous hindrance to what would otherwise be a more gradual but a permanent growth. The methods of the brute are used only where brains are not equal to the task it is desired to accomplish. In this way, many of the strongest and best men in the labor ranks will be turned against it, and will in time become a most powerful element backed by the great public sympathy to be reckoned with. Better grow a little more slowly and in accordance with just and righteous laws, and hence more surely and permanently, than to try the shortcut methods, for in this way many get swamped and tremendously delayed, while others never arrive. Those of the policies and methods above described become a sore upon the great body of splendid, honorable labor, which can ill afford to condone or stand for such methods, and personally, I do not believe it will very much longer, nor even countenance them. Does this seem like plain speaking? The only excuse to be offered, if indeed any excuse were necessary, is that it is spoken by one of labor's truest friends, and friends don't snivel, neither do they fawn, and having no ulterior ends to gain, there is no need for reticence in relation to plain truth. I believe the time is rapidly approaching, and it may be indeed immediately upon us as some signs seem to indicate, when labor is going to push squarely into the sphere of political action, even as the great masses of the people are moving along the lines of political action, unhampered as never before, because of more open vision, by political machines, or dictated to by notorious old hacks as party bosses. The day has already arrived for this in England, and today, the results of a late election. We see a splendid body of nearly 50 Labour members in Parliament, and if even fairly wise and discreet in their actions, as I fully believe they will be, their numbers will continue to increase, and there will be a strong party right in Parliament thinking and working directly for the interests of the great common people, not so hopelessly impotent, so far as actual accomplishment is concerned, as have been most of the political parties there during the last decade or more. I have long thought, looking at the numbers of the one and of the other, that the time had nearly come in Great Britain for the doing away of the House of Lords, and substituting in its place, shall we say, a House of Labour. But things move sometimes in a most indirect way, and it may be that through this the beginning of a long-needed labor and people's movement, this result in effect would be brought about. Who knows but that one of its greatest needs, perhaps the greatest need it has today, will be served by this new movement, that England and Scotland and Ireland will more rapidly be freed from the centuries-old curse of landlordism, and that the land now so held will in some wise method be brought back to the use of the people. The Labour Party, in cooperation with the progressive wing of the Liberal Party, should be able to bring about this sorely and long-needed end. And then if, speaking along general good lines, this combination could give to Great Britain a new, a better and broader universal public school system, something, I do not hesitate to say, akin to our own, or better still, then they would at once be dealing with one of its greatest delinquencies and one of its greatest and most pressing needs. In this way, numbers of other ailments, resulting directly from one or the other of these, or from both, would begin to be healed without any other special direct treatment. The excessive amount of drinking among the working classes, and among both men and women, the bane and the curse of this phase of British life today, and now almost universally recognized as such, would begin at once to be on the decrease. It comes primarily from the vacancy, the hopelessness, the want, and the despair in the lives of these vast numbers of Britain's population that have been induced directly or indirectly by these two causes, probably as much or more than by all other causes combined. And, speaking along the same line, who knows but that the splendid socialist body in the German parliament today, already numbering between 70 and 80 members, and steadily increasing in numbers and in influence, will have as its essential or primary mission the freeing of Germany of what royal and the privileged classes have evidently neither the brains nor the inclination to throw off, even for the relief of millions of people, the monstrous military system under which it labors, year after year. I think this new Labour Party in England as it grows will give its aid also in dealing more humanely, honorably, and hence in a more statesmanlike manner with India. And to labor in politics in this country, I would say, remember a fact accentuated by the fact of Britain's high and enviable position as regards cleanliness in politics, that we of the United States, notwithstanding our inclination to think otherwise, are among the lowest of the low in this respect, especially in our municipal politics. And remember that this condition has come about because we as a people have so allowed commercialism and large-moneyed interests to take from us and convert to themselves such valuable properties that their greed for more has become so insatiable that no man who fills public office today, municipal, state, or national, is sure to escape their blighting and benumbing influences. Hence, be careful in your nominees and in men to whom you give your political support, a direct or an indirect gift, depending upon whether at any particular center these agencies composed of our successful and respectable fellow citizens are bold and brazen in their methods, or very plausible and smooth and cunning, a direct or an indirect gift, to repeat, of 50,000 or 100,000 or more dollars, is a very sore temptation to a man in moderate circumstances, or to a poor man. The essential thing is to have men of known and proven integrity. Better a man of less culture, or even more liable to errors in judgment, than one subject to the money bags of the successful and respectable despoiler, the arch enemy of American institutions and of American citizenship today. Another point, hoping it will be received in the spirit in which it is given. Be not displeased or dissatisfied if those you elect, or those to whom you give your support, do not vote favorably for every labor bill that is proposed. Labor's welfare, and the welfare of any class or portion, must be always subservient to the general welfare. Class legislation is always in time unsatisfactory and destructive in its results. Class legislation emanating from labor alone would be but slightly preferable, if any, to that emanating from capital alone. Only as the general good is guarded and fostered and advanced will that of any class or portion be really and permanently conserved. Here is an inestimable service that lies in the power, if it lies in the heart, of labor to render itself and the nation. There is indeed a prophetic insight in the words of the good gray bard of democracy, words that were written by Walt Whitman nearly 40 years ago. I expect to see the day when the like of the present personnel of the governments, federal, state, municipal, military, and naval, will be looked upon with derision, and when qualified mechanics and young men will reach Congress and other official stations, sent in their working costumes, fresh from their benches and tools, and returning to them, again with dignity. The young fellows must prepare to do credit to this destiny, for the stuff is in them. The following are a few characteristic words from a speech to his constituency by an able member of the British Labour Party, who has served with great ability in Parliament before, and who in spite of much strenuous opposition was re-elected at a recent election by a majority of something upwards of 10,000 votes. The working class, professional men and shopkeepers are all struggling, some few to make a competence, but the great majority to earn a livelihood. Millions are steeped in poverty, whilst millions more are but 1 degree removed from it. While the useful classes toil and suffer, the owners of land and capital, and the schemers and gamblers of the stock exchange, are heaping up untold wealth. Whilst the poor die for lack of the barest necessaries of life, the rich revel in a riot of excess. Great accumulations of wealth menace our liberties, control the great London organs of the press, lead us into wars abroad, and poison the wells of public life at home. Landlordism and capitalism are the upper and nether millstones between which the life of the common people is being ground to dust. My one object in politics is to aid in creating the public opinion which will sweep away the causes which produce poverty, vice, crime, drunkenness, and immorality, and introduce an era of freedom, fraternity, and equality. This ideal state cannot be reached at one step, but much can be done to mitigate some of the graver evils arising out of our present system of wealth production. The immediate object of the Labour Party is to create a driving force in politics which will overcome the inertia of politicians in regard to social reforms and give the nation a strong, true lead along the paths which make for national righteousness. To see that children are properly fed and cared for, that the able are given an opportunity to work, and that comfort is brought into the life of the aged, are objects worth striving for. These things lie outside the domain of ordinary party politics, but they must be attended to if the nation is to be saved from decay. And should I again be returned as your representative, it will be my main concern to see that they are attended to. As a Democrat, I am opposed to every form of hereditary rule, and in favor of conferring full and unfettered powers upon the common people. In this connection, I include women as well as men. I think it is peculiarly fitting that an utterance of Lincoln close this part, asterisk. In my present position, I could scarcely be justified were I to omit raising a warning voice against the approach of returning despotisms. It is not needed nor fitting here that a general argument should be made in favor of popular institutions, but there is one point not so hackneyed to which I ask a brief attention. It is the effort to place capital on an equal footing with, if not above, labor in the structure of government. It is assumed that labor is available only in connection with capital, that nobody labors unless somebody else knowing capital somehow by the use of it induces him to labor. But capital is the fruit of labor and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital and deserves much the higher consideration. No men living are more worthy to be trusted than those who toil up from poverty, none less inclined to take or touch aught which they have not honestly earned. Let them beware of surrendering a political power which they already possess, and which, if surrendered, will surely be used to close the door of advancement against such as they, and to fix new disabilities and burden upon them until all of liberty shall be lost. Prophetic words, spoken of all who labor, and also words which show Lincoln's matchless faith in the great common people. He came from them. He knew them. He loved them. Can anyone have a doubt as to where he would stand in connection with the great and pressing questions that are immediately before us? 8. Agencies through which we shall secure the return of an efficient people's government and the return of their rights. How can we, as a people, get the machinery of government back into our own hands? In other words, how break up the alliance that the great moneyed interests have made with the political machine, the combination that has already well-nigh throttled democratic or representative government in the nation? We have seen, by illustrations perhaps almost too prolific, how the people's will is thwarted, how their desires are disregarded, and how they have literally to fight their chosen representatives in order to prevent them from selling out their interests completely to the agencies already mentioned. We need now a new and more comprehensive application of the term traitor, so that it shall include in its scope the one who, as a chosen and supposed representative of the people and hence of the country, for gold or for whatever gain, conspires with the enemies of his people and sells to them his people's interests, as scores of our representatives, municipal, state, national, have done in one form or another the past 12 months, the same as for many years that are gone. They will continue to do so and in greater numbers and to greater extent as each year passes, unless we as a people begin in some effective and common sense way to attend diligently to our own affairs in government. This is not a mere putting together of words, nor a false charge, nor an idle, thoughtless statement, but a hard, cold, though exceedingly unwelcome, fact. We must take it out of the power of men to make traitors in civil life, which are far more destructive and disastrous to the people's and therefore to the nation's welfare than the occasional traitor that appears in time of war. I had almost said this tendency must be checked, but the hard, cold facts demand one instead to say, this condition that is actually among us, sucking the very lifeblood from the body of freemen, must be speedily checked and driven from out the land, or the dissolution of the nation is to be the inevitable result, in addition to the humiliation attendant upon this condition, and also the great losses we have already sustained and will sustain to a continually increasing degree. Our governmental institutions today, not in theory perhaps, but as they actually exist, are neither democratic nor representative. This no thoughtful, clear-seeing man at all acquainted with existing conditions will even attempt to deny, however great may be his desire to do so. It is not necessary here to ask, why is this so? This we have gone into, both directly and indirectly, to almost a wearying extent already. The question is, how shall we get back in fact, and in actual practice and results, to what government among us is in theory, the government and institutions upon which we so pride ourselves? A serious shortcoming in our institutions has developed itself, a shortcoming which could scarcely be foreseen in the beginning. We must halt now to make the necessary changes and repairs, or the entire machinery will be wrecked, adding another huge junk pile to the wrecked and worn-out machinery of nations that once were great, but whose people were unable or illy inclined to see and grasp the meaning of new times and conditions, and arouse themselves sufficiently to master them instead of suffering themselves to be brought to a gradual ruin by them. A change now is essential, a repairing of the machinery. We must take a long step and get back to, or move forward to, actual representative government. Representative is here a better word perhaps than democratic. The New England town meeting still in active operation in hundreds of New England towns and villages, and a similar method in vogue in many of our newer western states, is perhaps the best concrete example of the latter. You who have had part in or who have attended such a meeting or meetings know how each year the voters of the town or village meet at the duly appointed time and place, and initiate, discuss, vote upon, and adopt such measures, make such appropriations, select such men to carry out their program as they decide are necessary or advisable for the coming year. You appreciate most fully how impossible it is with such a method to sell out the interests of the people of the village or town, because the people are there to attend to their own business and to look after their own interests. This method works just as effectively and as safely now for the interests of the people as it did 100 years ago, or when it was first instituted, and the reason is apparent on the face of it. Those who are acquainted with its effective workings would like to see it extended to all our villages and towns throughout the country, the same as it is being adopted here and there in various parts of our thriving newer western states. Because it has such a thorough common sense basis, it works as well in practice as in theory. It is better than representative government. It is pure democratic government. It is the principle upon which the institutions of a great nation can most safely be built. But when it comes to the larger units, the large city, the state, the nation, then its application becomes more difficult, if not entirely out of the question. As nearly as we can approach to it, however, is the best government. And in these larger units we have in theory an ideal system, in that we select men to represent us at seats of government, municipal, state, and national. We, however, have not completed the system. The result is that our theoretical representative government has become in practice thoroughly and notoriously, with a proper allowance of exceptions of course, misrepresentative. In other words, our system has developed, or has given evidence of some most serious shortcomings, and, I admit, shortcomings such as could not fully be foreseen in the beginning. What we of this generation and those of the generation rapidly coming upon the stage of action are called upon to do, is to recognize the exigencies of the time and amend or complete what today is far from what it must be made to be. Let the state legislature be an example of both municipal and national legislative bodies. The chief failure or weakness of any particular session of any legislature is that it fails to do certain things that the interests of the people require, and it does various other things that are diametrically opposed to the interests of the people, whose representatives its members are chosen nominally to be. Now the chief reason that is at the bottom of this twofold failure has been gone into so fully in previous pages that it is unnecessary to make useless repetition here. But the point is that in connection with the acts of these nominal representatives of the people have practically no recourse. In other words, they are absolutely at the mercy of their agents. We act in a way that no businessman, even for an instant, would think of acting in connection with his agents, or in a way that if he did so act, his business would be irrevocably ruined, and in many cases in less time than it would take to describe the process. Now, one feature in connection with which it is essential that we immediately repair the machinery of our government is that we have the power and the quick and ready power to initiate whatever measures a sufficient number of people feel the public interests require. Another feature is that we have the power to veto whatever measures our chosen representatives or supposed representatives may enact that a sufficient number of the people feel are opposed to the public welfare. These are two principles, fundamentally common sense and essential in order to perfect the running machinery of our government. In our system of representative government as it is worked out to the present time, the people, the source of power and in whose hands all power should reside, have lost, to all intents and purposes, the ability of having their desires or wishes put into force. We delegate power to men and hold them in no way responsible to us for the use of that power. And with the tremendous prices large corporations, many of them fattened off of the people's properties, are able to and do pay, we expect men, many of them entirely irresponsible because chosen by these interests for the direct furtherance of their ends, to work for our interests and for the public welfare. We do what no business manager would consent to or even think of doing, unless he were deliberately inviting the disruption or the certain annihilation of his business, and it requires only the most ordinary course of reasoning, and especially when reinforced by the lessons that are in such vast numbers being thrust into our faces, to know that the continuance of our representative system without a safeguard for retention of power on the part of the principals will mean continued, unsatisfactory and humiliating conditions and tremendous losses, and the eventual dissolution of every semblance of desirable government. In other words, we have come to a weakness, a breakdown in our machinery of government, which could not be fully anticipated by those who gave us our splendid beginnings of government, and which, let it be said, if we have but half the wisdom they displayed, we will, without delay and at whatever cost, be about repairing or remodeling, and we will bring it up to the development and to the needs of the times. Now, in what simple practical manner can we bring these two essential provisions into our respective spheres of government? Fortunately, we do not have to theorize in regard to the matter at all. A system has already been initiated and has been in effective use for many years already. From a nation that of all nations has the most ideally representative government, because the most democratic in its essence, Switzerland, we have a system that has been in successful operation for many years, hence thoroughly tested, and that has worked equally well in other countries where it has been put into operation, as also in several commonwealths in our own country. It is through the principle of direct legislation, by means of the initiative and referendum, that we can get the machinery of government back into our own hands and establish a truly representative system of government among us. The referendum started in 1830 in the canton of St. Gall, the initiative in 1845 in the canton of Vaud. Since those dates, the two institutions have marched in a triumphal tour through the Swiss Republic until they have been adopted in the federal constitution. It is not too much to say that within these few years Switzerland has been converted from a nest of oligarchies, entrenched behind vested interests, into the model democratic republic. The initiative means the proposal of a law or statute by the petition of a certain percentage of voters. The referendum means a vote by the people on any law passed by the legislature or on a law proposed by the initiative. The two are referred to many times under the term direct legislation, or sometimes characterized as guarded representative government. As a thoughtful writer has said, direct legislation is simply an application of the fundamental principles of agency recognized in every court of law in the civilized world, viz., that an agent must hold himself at all times subject to the command and approval of his principal. One employing an agent to manage his business expects him to do as he is directed in its conduct. If he is not willing to do this, he may be discharged by the principal. The employer retains the power of instant veto, not having to wait until the end of a specified term, during which his property might be mortgaged, sold, or given away. Here is a simple, an effective, and a fully demonstrated weapon with which we can strike the necessary blows. It is a practicable and attainable method because it cannot be made an issue of parties and politics. It cannot be made a football of political parties, because it is something in connection with which all men really agree. It is a principle that is almost axiomatic in its truth, and such principles are not subject to dispute. And moreover, so far as dominant parties at least are concerned, no Republican who believes with Lincoln in a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, will dispute its wisdom or oppose its adoption and use. And no Democrat who believes with Jefferson that governments are Republican only in proportion as they embody the will of the people and execute it, and government is more or less Republican in proportion as it has in its possession more or less of this ingredient of the direct action of the citizens. And as is evident, no new party that has arisen or that may arise, working for the people's greater interest than they are able to be persuaded the two dominant parties, as at present constituted, are working for, will oppose the adoption and application of such a principle. Moreover, there is no leader, no party, sufficiently foolish, however great his natural desire might be to do otherwise, as to array himself against such an axiomatically sound principle of truly representative government as to oppose it, when its advocates once get it squarely before the people as an issue to be acted upon. It seems to me also that those who have various desires and plans for the betterment of governmental institutions, however ideal their conceptions and plans may be, can and will unite upon such a common sense and practical agency, through which effective strides can be made that will pave the way, and that in time will lead to the realization of such hopes and such plans. From the very nature of the principle of direct or guarded legislation that we are considering, it would almost seem that specific arguments in its favor were unnecessary. It may not come amiss, however, to give briefly an enumeration of some of those most evident, or a sort of summary, of those suggested or hinted at in the foregoing pages of this chapter. First and foremost, as must be evident to all who have more or less of an intimate knowledge of conditions as they actually exist among us today, is the fact that as a matter of pure self-preservation of our form of government, and thereby our interests, this amending, this completing of our political system is necessary. It has become essential to the proper working of representative government. Without this power held in reserve by the people, we make our chosen representatives who would otherwise be honorable men, intent and determined upon the people's interests, the prey of these same nefarious influences for all time to come. Or, on the other hand, we make these supposed chosen representatives whose candidacy is managed by these same interests, and who have us elect these, their own agents, for them, practically masters of all our common possessions, with a free hand to betray our welfare into the hands of these interests. In other words, direct legislation is essential to representative government in complex or large communities, essential to the realization of anything approaching true democracy. It is simply a common-sense application of the principles of agency, affording the principal his proper rights of veto, construction, control, and discharge. Direct legislation means control of your servants instead of letting your servants control you. From this, then, follows naturally the fact that bribery and the corrupt and venal lobby will, to a great extent, be done away with, or they will be so diluted that the results will be practically the same. Where $50,000 would buy the necessary number of councilmen or legislators to buy the passage of a measure, the briber, the agent of the interest, could not with this amount or any amount buy 50,000 or 5,000 or any large number of citizen voters to vote for or to pass a measure against their own interests. Such a thing is scarcely conceivable. The interests then are not going to pay their good money to men who cannot deliver the goods. And under this system they cannot deliver the goods because they would not have the final say in regard to the matter at issue. Rings and bosses will lose their hold and their business. Franchise grabs, as well as blackmailing bills, will in time disappear, because in case of the former, the people will be able to see to it that their properties are retained for their own use and welfare, and in case of the latter, the people can always be appealed to with the assurance that justice will be compelled. The following paragraphs from a former distinguished judge and a man who knew well the methods of the boss, the machine, and the interests are most appropriate here. The fierce commercialism of the age, which has tended to enthrone the dollar and enslave the man, has lowered the standards and has covered the land with corruption until corrupt concentrations of money, wielded by unscrupulous men, have acquired such a complete control of the governments, national, state, and municipal, that the people are almost helpless. Laws destructive to their interests are passed through bribery, and laws necessary for their protection are kept off the statute book by bribery. To meet this new and unfortunate condition, it is necessary that the people be given the power in certain emergencies to legislate direct, either by a popular vote to put specific acts upon the statute book, or to declare certain specific acts already on the statute book to be null and void. This would destroy the business of bribery, because it would render the fruits of bribery worthless. No corporation would buy a legislature or a city council if the acts of that legislature or council could be nullified by the people. This system has worked marvelously well where it has been tried. It is not a question to speculate about. It is not a chimerical idea. It is simply a question of self-preservation. And the following from Governor Folk when the people of Missouri were finally aroused and determined to free themselves from most debasing and well-nigh intolerable conditions is more than suggestive. Vote for the initiative and referendum, a system that will be the death blow to corruption and the only true remedy for bribery. Why elect me unless I am given the proper tools? While on the one hand the application of the initiative and referendum would have a very telling effect upon the party boss and the machine, upon the Star Chamber, arranging methods through which almost every phase of legislation must pass, it would also on the other hand call into public life in many cases a higher grade of men, for the higher the plane politics is upon, the better the men that are naturally attracted to it. This is the general rule. The exception occurs in case of the occasional brave and earnest man who sees the well-nigh intolerable conditions in political affairs around him, and who without thought of self and without counting the cost, sets about in an endeavor to end them. It will promote thought and discussion and a greater intelligence on the part of all people in connection with all public measures. As it is, the average citizen, good citizen if you please, has no part in the discussion nor in the forming of conclusions in legislative matters. He has no method except in some cumbersome and roundabout and generally ineffective way of making his desires or his protests regarding matters of legislation known. With this simple and effective direct instrument in the hands of good citizens, their interest in good government and in all measures of public concern and welfare would revive, and by reason of the healthy stimulation it would receive, it would give birth to a new type of patriotism that would redeem and carry our institutions long strides towards what they are yet to be. And its influence upon the youth of the land, as they in turn come into the field of action, it is easy to foresee. It would strengthen our respect for law, instead of our growing disrespect for it, because then its enactment would emanate from the mind, the conscience, the abiding will of the sovereign people, instead of legislators, some of whom, says an editorial in the New York Independent, are wise men, some of whom are good men, many of whom are fools, and not a few of whom are scoundrels. It will separate issues from men, thereby fostering intelligent discussion and keeping real issues fairly before the people. As important a feature as any in its favor is the fact that it is the remedy, the reform, the amending, the completing of our governmental institutions along the lines of least resistance, which is a most important feature in connection with practical politics and in connection with political growth and continual higher political attainment. We have considered, though in very brief form, the reasons or arguments in favor of direct or guarded legislation. What are the arguments against it? I have never seen more than two that are really worthy of consideration. One is that the people will make mistakes. The other is that they will abuse this power. As to the former, we will readily grant the truth of the assertion. The people will make occasional mistakes, and they will be apt to make more mistakes at first than they will later on with more experience and with such increased intelligence in connection with matters of public policy as this educative process will bring about. That no system is wholly perfect will be most readily admitted by all. But the vital question is, will the people make as many mistakes working directly for their own interests as the mistakes made? And that mistakes are sometimes made by the people's representatives will be admitted and freely perhaps by all, by these representatives, combined with the frightful wrongs and injustices that are frequently perpetrated under our present irresponsible representative system, where bribery and graft and public debauchery have become so widespread and so general on account of this weakness in our system, as to make us the laughingstock of practically every other civilized country in the world, Russia possibly excepted. The people know their own desires and aims and their own business better than it can be known by any number of representatives, even though they might be uniformly wise and honest. The man who is afraid to trust the people when it comes to attending to their own affairs has something radically wrong in his mental makeup, or has something undercover that will not stand the scrutiny of honest and honorable men. Watch him. We must, moreover, get over the idea that matters of government are deep and intricate and complex matters. When it comes to attending to their own affairs on the part of the people, there is nothing intricate or complex, or there is nothing as intricate and complex as what at first thought seem. But things are made, or are made to seem, intricate or complex, by the professional politician, by the paid agents, and at times the paid attorneys of thieving or stock-juggling corporations, or privilege-seeking or law-defying corporations, combines and agencies of the various types that are continually at work. So much then for the argument that the people will make mistakes. As to the other argument above noted, that the people will abuse this power, the testimony in an overwhelming abundance is that it is entirely unfounded, that it has no basis in actually demonstrated fact. This argument that the people will abuse this power which is not borne out by the facts, but which has on the contrary been wholly disproved by such facts as we have up to the present time, brings us to the enunciation of one of the strongest possible reasons for the initiative and referendum, namely, that the very fact of the people having this power reserved in their own hands, and without having to have recourse to it at all, prevents in many cases questionable or baneful legislation, and on the other hand compels legislation that would not many times be enacted were it not that the people hold this compelling power. The holding of this power indicates, and makes all too plainly evident to the people's representatives and to those who would debauch and buy them, that the people hold in their own hands the final power, and their legislators cannot be bought successfully without the buying of the people, which on the very face of it is impossible. Direct legislation amendments have already become a part of the constitutions of several of our progressive newer Western states, where the proposal of direct legislation has been brought squarely before the people to receive their sanction or their veto. It has in almost every case been adopted by an overwhelming vote. It has been made part of the charter law already in a few cities, and in every case so far, state and municipal, it has given good results. In many cases results that could not possibly be accomplished in any other way, or by any other at present known. A direct legislation amendment went before the people of the state of Oregon at the general election of 1902 and was adopted by an overwhelming majority, a vote of a little over 10-1. The essence of this new provision may be said to be as follows, contained in the opening sentence of Article 4, Section 1. The legislative authority of the state shall be vested in a legislative assembly, consisting of a Senate and a House of Representatives, but the people reserve to themselves power to propose laws and amendments to the Constitution, and to enact or reject the same at the polls, independent of the legislative assembly, and also reserve at their option the power to approve, or reject at the polls any act of the legislative assembly. As to the numbers required to make effective this power held in reserve by the people, 8% of the legal voters of the state have the power to propose or initiate laws, constitutional amendments, etc., and 5% may demand a referendum on any act or acts passed by the legislature when their petitions are filed within 90 days after the adjournment of the session during which they were enacted. The legislature itself may refer any act passed by it to the people. The governor cannot exercise the veto power in connection with any measure referred to the people. During even the comparatively short time that the people of the state of Oregon have had this amendment incorporated into their constitution, as has been well said, it has proved a field of dragon's teeth to the Oregon machine politician. Through the possession of this, they have already secured that now essential measure for political decency and political progress, a direct primary election law, than which there is nothing more effective to put political bosses and machine politicians out of business. On May 5, 1910, Honorable Jonathan Bourne, Jr. of Oregon, delivered in the United States Senate a most telling and illuminating exposition of the truly representative government that now exists in that state, and incidentally of the results that through the same agencies can obtain in every state. Coming from so able an authority, the following brief extracts, dealing with its results only, will be most opportune here. After stating his thorough belief in a real representative government in distinction from the thoroughly misrepresentative government that has come about so generally under our present systems, he says, since that amendment was adopted, the people of Oregon have voted upon 23 measures submitted to them under the initiative, 5 submitted under the referendum, and 4 referred to the people by the legislature. That the people acted intelligently is evident from the fact that in no instance has there been general dissatisfaction with the result of the vote. The measures submitted presented almost every phase of legislation, and some of them were bills of considerable length. Results attained under direct legislation in Oregon compare so favorably with the work of a legislative assembly that an effort to repeal the initiative and referendum would be overwhelmingly defeated. No effort has ever been attempted. It has been asserted that the people will not study a large number of measures, but will vote in the affirmative, regardless of the merits of the measures submitted. Experience in Oregon has disproved this, for the results show that the people have exercised discriminating judgment. They have enacted laws and have adopted constitutional amendments in which they believe and have defeated those of which they did not approve. The people are not only intelligent, but fair and honest. When the initiative and referendum was under consideration, it was freely predicted by enemies of popular government that the power would be abused and that capitalists would not invest their money in a state where property would be subject to attacks of popular passion and temporary whims. Experience has exploded this argument. There has been no hasty or ill-advised legislation. The people act calmly and deliberately, and with that spirit of fairness which always characterizes a body of men who earn their living and acquire their property by legitimate means. Corporations have not been held up and blackmailed by the people, as they often have been by legislators. Pinch bills are unknown. The people of Oregon were never before more prosperous and contented than they are today, and never before did the state offer such an inviting field for investment of capital. Not only are 2 transcontinental railroads building across the state, but several interurban electric lines are under construction and rights-of-way for others are in demand. I have mentioned all of these facts for the purpose of showing that the people of my state, and, I believe, the people of every other state, can be trusted to act intelligently and honestly upon any question of legislation submitted for their approval or disapproval. The initiative and referendum is the keystone of the arch of popular government, for by means of this the people may accomplish such other reforms as they desire. The initiative develops the electorate because it encourages study of principles and policies of government, and affords the originator of new ideas in government an opportunity to secure popular judgment upon his measures if 8% of the voters of his state deem the same worthy of submission to popular vote. The referendum prevents misuse of the power temporarily centralized in the legislature. The next step after the adoption of the initiative and referendum was the adoption, in 1904, by a vote of 56,205 to 16,354, of a direct primary law, which is designed to supersede the old and unsatisfactory convention system. The final step in the establishment of popular government in Oregon was the adoption of the Recall Amendment to the Constitution, which was adopted in 1908 by a vote of 58,381 to 31,002. The recall, to my mind, is rather an admonitory or precautionary measure, the existence of which will prevent the necessity for its use. At rare intervals there may be occasion for exercise of the recall against municipal or county officers, but I believe the fact of its existence will prevent need for its use against the higher officials. It is, however, an essential feature of a complete system of popular government. Under the machine and political boss system, the confidence of sincere partisans is often betrayed by recreant leaders in political contests and by public servants who recognize the irresponsible machine instead of the electorate as the source of power to which they are responsible. If the enforcement of the Oregon laws will right these wrongs, then they were conceived in wisdom and born in justice to the people, in justice to the public servant, and in justice to the partisan. Plainly stated, the aim and purpose of the laws is to destroy the irresponsible political machine and to put all elective offices in the state in direct touch with the people as the real source of authority. In short, to give direct and full force to the ballot of every individual elector in Oregon and to eliminate dominance of corporate and corrupt influences in the administration of public affairs. The Oregon laws mark the course that must be pursued before the wrongful use of corporate power can be dethroned, the people restored to power, and lasting reform secured. They ensure absolute government by the people. Additional testimony from a citizen of the same state as to the healthful influences at work under this system of truly representative government is as follows, asterisk. The way in which this formidable list of subjects was dealt with is highly creditable to the Oregon electorate. In no case was there indifference. Everything points to the fact that the ordinary voter studied the questions proposed, made up his mind before going to the polls, and voted independently on all the propositions placed before him. The measures have provoked a vast deal of discussion. Indeed, it may be said that for a number of months past the people of Oregon have all been more or less actively engaged in the business of legislation. The educational benefits incident to the system are bound to be very important. With a change in the initiative law perfecting the method of distributing copies of proposed measures to the voters, there is no reason why every farmers' club, labor union, and lyceum in the state cannot become in effect a miniature legislative assembly. In this way, the interests of all sections and all classes of the people are bound to receive attention. Measures will be proposed for submission to the local representatives and others to go before the people at the general elections. But, with all this political activity, there is no evidence of dangerously radical tendencies. The people want to make their government as perfect as possible, but are not disposed to hurry the process unduly. The recent election, indeed, revealed in a striking manner their conservative disposition. In conclusion, we remark among the Oregon people a genuine joy at the discovery of their political capabilities. Representative government is good, but there is an exhilaration in direct participation in lawmaking. The interest is sharpened, the intelligence is quickened, moral susceptibilities are aroused. The Oregon people are convinced that in the double form of government, partly representative and partly direct, they have discovered the true solution of the problem of self-government in our American states. Among the arguments on the part of those naturally opposed to this method of changing our present misrepresentative into a truly representative government will be that of expense to the state, hence to the taxpayer. If this objection were well-founded, it would undoubtedly still be the source of a great saving. The objection, however, does not bear investigation. The submission of the total of 32 measures to the people since the system has been in operation in the state of Oregon has cost the state a total of some $25,000, or an average of less than $800 for each measure. What the saving of a single one of these measures might mean to the people, and especially as time passes, can well be left to the imagination of an intelligent reader. The same cry was raised at first by its opponents in Los Angeles, until through this power in the hands of the people, the passage of a single measure there was productive of a saving of over $1 million. This objection is no longer raised at Los Angeles. Another agency that is going to tell strongly in the redemption of our present political methods is independence in party action. The time has about passed when a sort of blind, senseless, fanatical allegiance to party is going to dominate men as it has in the past. Thoughtful men everywhere are beginning to realize the stupidity and low moral plane of such allegiance. One reason that the low party machines, as well as those of the higher grade, have been able to be built up with all their damnable characteristics, is that good men and thoughtful men and patriotic men have not in sufficient numbers rebuked their party managers and defeated them in their questionable and dishonorable doings, and have not rebuked the selection of questionable or venal or notoriously unfit men by defeating them at the polls, thereby pushing home a lesson to the party boss or party managers that would be of telling effect, that would be of real service to the party. And when a sufficiently large number of men make it clearly understood that they will give unqualified support to that party which in every case puts up the best man for public office, and which stands honestly and squarely for measures of the best public policy, then we will see a great difference in the standards of men nominated for public office, and in the methods of political party management. In our country, we fool the people with some pretended differences between one party called the Republican and another called the Democratic. So says an American writer in dealing with the agencies that have made the governments of Australia and New Zealand so truly representative of the people's welfare. This cry to loyalty to party is generally an emanation from some old hack of a party boss, many times dissolute and dishonest and criminal, both at heart and in practice, an emanation directly from him or through some of his equally dissolute lieutenants, to hoodwink and to hold the members to the party under his or their joint domination, in order that at the right time they may deliver the goods, the people's interests, to those with whom they are in league. That the people have not seen through this method and have not recognized this fact in much larger numbers long before this is a most astounding fact. But eyes are now open and minds are now alert and discriminating, and the death knell of these parasites upon the body politic, of these scorpions in their deadly sting, and the methods of the moneyed interests in their dealings with them, are being understood more clearly every day and every month. Says a writer in the Springfield Republican, independent voters, after all, are every year more numerous in this country. In Massachusetts and Rhode Island, there were some 50,000 men who, after voting for a Republican candidate for president, were capable of voting for a Democratic candidate for governor. In Minnesota, there were at least 50,000 more of the same sort, and they did business on Election Day. It is discrimination of this sort that will make the Republic live forever, if anything will. Let us see how it sometimes works as it now exists. An election is approaching and nominations for certain offices are to be made. The directing officers or the agents of certain leading public service corporations, etc., want always to be on the safe side, and want to be sure that safe, sane, and conservative men are nominated. At the appointed time and place, a conference is held between them and the party boss or the party managers, the party that is dominant or that seems the more likely to carry the particular election. Then, if there is doubt in regard to this, the party boss or the party managers of both parties are seen and arranged with. The interests care no more whether the men to be elected are members of one party or members of another party than they care whether they belong to one or another religious denomination. If the business interests that are liable to be affected have nothing of special importance before them just then, they in turn are seen by the party boss or party managers to ascertain if the candidates about to be selected are agreeable to them, in order that the party have their support, etc., etc., and the ticket is made accordingly. If it is a locality where this kind of machine politics has been in operation for some time, and where the party managers are of the ordinarily low type and have a sufficiently certain hold on affairs, then men of like character are the natural nominees, those whose subserviency is a matter not open to question. If conditions are different, then a very respectable sort of man, but always safe, sane, and conservative, such as we find for some reason watching out most carefully for the interest business for them, is the natural type of candidate. But whichever the type selected according to the exigencies of the case, as the campaign advances the loyalty to party, cry is continually to be heard through the various agencies and methods employed and with which we are now so familiar. Then on election day we march up to the polls to be plucked by this machine management that will sell us and our interests out at the first opportunity, or by this contemptible combination of machine politics with the interests. I do not say this is true in every case. In many of our smaller towns and villages, there may be simply traces of this, in some cases none at all. But wherever it is of sufficient importance, you may be sure that matters are taken care of. Moreover, there is not a city of any considerable size in the country, and there is not a state where this has not been, or is not now going on. This is the combination that has brought the corruption and bribery and debauchery into politics that is now undermining our very institutions of government. And what are we going to do about it? I'll tell you what we are going to do about it. We are going to change our method of nominations and change it in such a way that the boss, the machine, in their combination with the interests, are going to have their feet knocked from under them. A system of direct nominations by the people whereby they can ballot for their own candidates after much the same plan as they now ballot at regular elections will soon enable us to select our own candidates for public office, thus making it harder for the combinations to be made whereby we are continually being sold out, sometimes so openly and so brazenly, or in cases where it is not this, then making it harder for combines and trusts and public service corporations to secure such favoring legislation as enables them to become monopolies, stifling all honest competition, ruining thousands of businesses, moving up and keeping up prices of necessities to suit their own advantage, and always in advance of whatever advance comes in wages to the wage earner, the professional man, and to all outside the combination. The caucus and the nominating convention as it has become today is the starting point of all that is corrupt and venal and vile in our American politics. It is the stronghold of the boss, and with this in his possession, he controls elections and legislation, spreads corruption as suits his ends, and makes merchandise of government. Through it he has well-nigh destroyed popular rule, and through him the people have at each election, with an occasional exception here and there, been given merely the choice of two evils. It is only through the destruction of the present system that the power of the boss and his machine can be destroyed, for it is through it that he thrives and carries on his impudent business. Several states have already enacted more or less effective primary election laws, not perfect in all cases, but being amended and made better as each opportunity for betterment manifests itself. With such a system, it is evident that no party boss could dictate nominations, and without this power he could control neither patronage nor subsequent legislative action, for he is able to dictate these solely through the dependence of candidates upon him. Newly elected officers could then look to the people for their instructions and not be compelled to receive their directions from the party boss and his machine. And so far as the voters are concerned, each voter would have set up before him in every primary election, and later at the general election, definite, intelligent statements as to the policies which would be carried out in this or that office by the candidates who sought his suffrage. National, state, and local issues would not be mixed together. If such a system were enforced, no people would have to submit to the shame of accepting the marionette of one boss or another. No machine could fatten on officially protected vice or on the sale of legislation. The government would be as good as the people, no better, no worse. Here then is a simple, a practical, and an effective way whereby we can battle with, undermine, and wrest the control of government from this combination that has been steadily and systematically perverting all our forms of government for years. Direct nominations by the people and direct legislation by the people through the initiative and referendum will give us back our government. They are not ends, merely means to ends, but they are the weapons, the strategic weapons, so to speak, that must be gained in order to fight successfully the great battles that are now on, for almost before we have realized it the revolution has already begun. As it is, fighting with these forces of mammon and corruption, or this combination between the two, it is like an army, a large army, if you please, moving out with wooden swords and wooden guns against opposing forces, much smaller it is true, and but a small fraction in numerical strength when compared to the greater army, but entrenched behind fortresses of great strength and of systematic building, and every individual armed with the most up-to-date patterns of machine guns, with which the entire larger army can be mowed down before it can get even to their entrenchments. We must have these weapons or lose in the great fight. How shall we secure them? For they constitute the key to the whole situation. Clearly they will not come to us through the initiative action of any political party as such, that is, until forced by the people. We will secure these measures, these weapons, through the action of groups of determined men throughout all our states, who will band themselves together in leagues, known as direct nomination, direct legislation, people's power leagues, public welfare leagues, or whatever name or names they may see fit to work under. They will formulate the issues, with no small expense both as to time and as to means. They will carry on an educational campaign, and later, reinforced by the support of the people, they will take their bills to the various legislatures. They will compel whatever members may choose or whatever members may dare to oppose them to show their colors, that the people may know who their enemies, their betrayers, are. If then a sufficient number of members is bought off by the combination in the first meeting of the legislature before which their bills are brought, they will profit by the knowledge of the methods employed to defeat them. They will go back to their campaigns and to the people with a renewed energy until the voice of the people will speak with such certain tones that even the lowest of the combination tools will not dare do anything but listen.
Thus reinforced, they will go back to the next meeting of the legislature, into which they have in the meantime put men who will fight from within, and after another hard fight, or possibly even another in some cases, these weapons will be secured and put into the hands of the people. We can spend years in desultory warfare with ineffective or inadequate weapons. With these weapons we can make an effective, a telling, and a conquering fight, taking one after another the citadels of the entrenched interests opposed to the public and the people's welfare, the citadels of monopoly and of corporation greed, all of them resulting from the combination of the interests with the political boss and the political machine. With these weapons we will be moving and continually moving, not merely marking time. With power in our own hands through the possession of these weapons, instead of a much talked of and boasted power that has become merely an empty shell, While the real power is in the hands of the almost insignificantly small numbers who are using it for their own purposes, we will stand as a body of freemen holding the franchise in their own hands, should stand. Now here is a program, simple and effective it seems to me, that we can begin at once to put into operation to bring to an end this intolerable situation that has gradually come about among us. If anyone has a better, simpler, more effective program, I am willing to yield at every point where its really superior features can be established. I do not mean for some ideal state in the by and by, but I mean as a force to set into operation in a practical and telling way now, that we may be up and doing those things that will lead to the ideal state that will be established by our doing now, today, what there is to do, and tomorrow the same, and tomorrow. I am an opportunist in that I believe that the way to attain is to take hold with the clearest insight we can command, of the thing that needs to be done and that can be done today, letting that lead to the next thing that will in turn develop itself from it, and this into the next, until in time the foreseen goal is reached. To see an ideal state, and to sit and do nothing until that ideal state is developed and we are in it, or because it cannot be attained all at once, is entirely contrary to all natural law of which we, so far, at least, have any tangible knowledge. With these agencies of political power in our hands we will then be in a position to move along the lines of political and economic advancement untrammeled. We can then take each step and secure each change for political and economic betterment just as quickly as we see such step or such change to be desirable. We could then institute, as several of our progressive states in keeping with some of the more progressive European countries are instituting, or have instituted the recall. By means of it when a public official shows himself too subservient to the will or to the interests of public service corporations, trusts, combines, etc., or shows too fully a disregard of the expressed will of the people, or violates too fully his anti-election pledges, he can, upon petition of a stipulated number of voters, providing it is sustained by a majority of voters when referred in a regular manner to them, be recalled and retired and a true representative of the people's interests be elected in his place. This is a principle long recognized and long established in the business world. No businessman would against his will continue in his employ an agent incompetent, or a thieving, dishonest agent. We are certainly capable of exhibiting as much ordinary common sense in matters of government where such tremendous interests are at stake, as we are in matters of ordinary business. It would end the public careers of men, quite a little list in our New York State legislature, for example, who have been there, some for years, in the direct service and in the direct pay of corporations that are filching the people of the state for their own gain, and whose methods, whose influence, and whose subserviency to these interests are more detrimental and more destructive to the people's interest and the interests of the state, than the acts of thousands whom we call criminals in our state penitentiaries today. If this volume were given to personalities, this list in the New York legislature could be given. Those in the legislatures in other states as well as in the councils of various large cities, will come to the minds of those at all conversant with these matters. Then the election of United States senators by the direct vote of the people, such as practically all are now convinced is not only desirable but necessary, can be brought about in a comparatively short time, and this stronghold of monopoly in our national government can be taken. With it can be retired some of the various members that will readily come to the mind of every reader at all conversant with public affairs, that are very carefully watching and upholding even with a grim defiance of the public the interests of the interests. The possession of these agencies would enable us to bring about more easily and more quickly a change that the movement now worldwide along the lines of a truer democracy, along the lines of an increasing power in the hands of the sovereign people, is demanding, namely, that all federal judges and all important officers now receiving their positions by appointment, be made elective at the hands of the people. It is quite as necessary that laws and statutes be construed by representatives of the popular will of the people, as that the laws and statutes be enacted in the beginning by the same agency. Here is a change in a feature of our government that we will do wisely now in giving attention to. The possession of these weapons would enable us to bring about effective inheritance tax laws, or an effective act limiting, for the greater public good, the accumulations, with constant additions thereto, the vast private fortunes that will become in time as menacing and as poisoning to the greater public welfare, as they have proved to be in all times past. That we must be about this matter in some statesmanlike and eminently fair manner is now clearly evident to large portions, and perhaps it is not too much to say, to the majority of thinking men who are more interested in the public welfare than they are in their own selfish personal gain. A wise measure along these lines, moreover, cannot ill affect even the possessors of these vast accumulations, for excessive wealth is of no advantage, or rather of no real benefit, to any man nor to his descendants. If we cannot, in all cases, get at a just basis in the distribution of the products of labor, or in the gains from those properties whose great increase in values is caused by the life and the toil of all the people, then we will have to get at the matter also from the other end. Not the interests of a few individuals, able and shrewd I admit, but the welfare of all the people, must be the motto of a really great and continually progressive nation. That we will be able to find a fair and a just basis upon which we shall build such action, I am confident. It is perhaps not unwise to say that we must get the agencies of government so into our own hands by these direct methods that we can put an effective end to the gambling and predatory methods of Wall Street, not to any methods that are honorable and legitimate and commendable, but to those that are hellish in their nature and whereby tribute is levied upon every man, woman, and child in the nation in order that a few buccaneers may add still more to their already enormous and illegitimate gains. Their methods enable them to reach out into every state and every city and every hamlet in the nation to gather in their tribute and their toll. Many of our clearest thinking men are realizing that the time has come that a federal bureau of corporations be established, so that all companies, corporations, trusts, etc., doing in any way an interstate business get their charters and articles of incorporation from the federal government, and be strictly subject to its scrutiny and regulations. On the basis of certain fair but adequate requirements, those companies and corporations designing to do a business unfair, unlawful, and illegitimate, could be weeded out. The present stock watering methods now used so freely, and so openly employed by practically all large companies and corporations, and all methods designed to give inflated or fictitious values to their stocks, could then be suppressed and could be dealt with in a systematic and satisfactory manner. The possession of these weapons will enable us as an intelligent and a determined people, to bring about such regulations or limitations in the methods and aggressions of our great modern trusts and combines as become monopolistic in their methods or oppressive and therefore destructive to the individual citizen's welfare. We could then counterbalance in an effective way the skillful work of the representatives of these agencies that have become entrenched in our various halls of legislation. We could counterbalance the efforts of these representatives of the interests, as they obstruct and fight from within every measure that is designed to protect the people and the public from the aggressions of such of these as are dishonorable and law-defying or law-breaking in their practices, as well as blighting and corrupting in their influences. We could also in time, and quickly in some cases, cause a complete political extinction to become the lot of the representatives of these interests. I would not be understood as opposed to any of those interests that are honorable and above board in their methods, or opposed to the advancement of those interests that are not opposed to the greater public interests. Large corporations and large combinations of capital can accomplish results that are of great public benefit. Those that are honorable in their methods should in no way be hampered. I do not believe on the other hand that they should be unduly favored, for they are abundantly able to take care of themselves. When, however, they secure their favors and their advantages at the terrific price that in the end must be paid by the individual citizen and the public welfare, then I say we cannot, without intelligent and effective protest, sit by and complacently permit these blighting agencies longer to ply their trade. That a corporation is large and successful is no sign that it is dishonorable or criminal in its methods. Very many, however, are. Those that are honorable in their methods should be given every respect and every aid up to the point that this respect and this aid is not detrimental to the interests of others and to the public welfare. From those that are not we should not only withhold respect and aids of every kind, but we should find an orderly and effective method not only of checking their aggressions, but if they persist in such methods then of putting them out of business completely. Are we as a people intelligent and determined enough to do this? Other people are. I believe we are also. When the people are sufficiently united and determined, these matters are not so complex and difficult of attainment, as they in the ordinary course of events and under a half-hearted method of procedure, appear. But before a people of the right temper, these forces of corruption and privilege will listen and will seek cover, and when they are once on the run they are among the greatest of cowards. Ordinarily they will not stand in a square and open fight, but when rooted they are liable to pop up again in the most unexpected ways. They must be continually watched. I think the author of the following paragraph, in the Outlook, reads aright the signs and the temper of the times. The people do not resent wealth, but they do resent predatory wealth. They would not despoil their neighbor of any property honestly acquired, but they would despoil him of the power to monopolize any of the avenues of trade or to control any of the functions of government. To compel plutocracy to act decently is not enough. They wish to destroy plutocracy and re-establish democracy, perhaps I should say to establish, for the first time in the world's history, a democracy of industry. And they are quietly but nonetheless eagerly asking, what next? Not the regulation but the overthrow of monopoly is the popular demand. It should be the purpose of a wise and liberty-loving people to afford every encouragement and protection to each and every honest and legitimate business, be it large or be it small. In this there should be no discrimination. But when through bribery and the debauchery of public servants, and when through the securing of unwarranted favors they are detrimental to practically every other interest, or when by technical evasions or delays in the process of existing laws under the guidance of skilled legal talent, or when through contemptuous disregard or open and apparently fearless violations of existing laws, or when by virtue of the confiscation of vast amounts of the people's property, companies, corporations, vested interests, trusts, and monopolies become so great, so contemptuous of the people's rights, of the state, and of the entire public welfare, then it is the plain duty of a worthy, fair-minded, and liberty-loving people who have or who can have the full agencies of government in their own hands, to come forward and as one man to cry out, thou thief, thou briber and debaucher, thou criminal black in your law-defying and law-breaking methods, thou despoiler of other men's goods, thou robber. Of even widows and dependent children, thou traitor to the public welfare, so far and no farther. Let every vested interest be protected, but let every smaller interest be protected also in like manner. Let no favoritism be shown whereby one class of interests is able to cripple, crush, and kill any other interest. There is no danger of the American people, unless trifled with too long and unless goaded to the last ditches of desperation, manifesting any undue hostility to any vested interests, and certainly none to any that are honorable and straightforward in their methods, and is there a man living who would think or who would be bold enough to proclaim that hostility should not be shown to all that are not? It is only an ignorant, or a weakly or foolishly self-complacent, or an already conquered people, though perchance ignorant of the fact, that will not arouse itself to a sufficient hostility to put an end to an economic slavery of such type, and that unless ended will have as its final end a complete economic and political slavery. We have this interesting and farcical condition that has come about among us, interesting were it not so notoriously bold and brazen and so degrading and destructive in its results. A body of rich men individually and collectively conspire for their own greater and quicker enrichment, deliberately to violate some fully established law. Many times then through certain other influences they set into operation they are not even molested, or if so they many times go scot-free. If, however, they are tried and convicted they are let off with a paltry fine $5,000 or $10,000, or in rare cases $25,000. An employee of one of these corporations has filched from his employers a few hundred or a few $1,000s, or another has filched from the city or state. He is promptly arrested, speedily tried, and sentenced to the penitentiary for a term ranging say from 2 to 20 years. Now why not fine him a certain small percentage of what he has filched? Is it 5,000? Make him pay over 500 of it and call the matter ended. In other words, what effect, or rather what deterrent effect, has a fine of 5,000 or 25,000 or $1 million where millions are gained on the part of the managers and proprietors of certain trusts and corporations, through their criminal violations of established law? If it is right that the small filcher whom we call criminal be sent to state's prison, then there is the same right and all the greater reason that these criminals who filch under the most cold-blooded and deliberate methods their millions, who hamper or destroy thousands of businesses, who undermine the very foundations of law, of order, of free institutions, then I say there is the same right and all the greater reason that these be sent to state's prison, or that they be fined so heavily that it results in a virtual confiscation of their entire business, or both. We should not be at all chary about talking of confiscation when it comes to dealing with criminals. We must, as a people, speedily get the machinery of government, the lawmaking and interpreting power so into our own hands through the simple and direct methods already enumerated, that we can put a speedy end to this travesty on justice and order. I do not believe in condemning any man. My own errors and shortcomings forbid that. So to a greater or less extent do those of every man. It is only an all-wise and a faultless being that is capable of judging or condemning, only on the part of such would it be at all consistent. But such a being I believe would find no place in his mind or in his heart for condemnation. And understanding so well the frailties of human nature, in all his judgments he would be most lenient. But when a certain order of society is established that men may live harmoniously and mutually advantageously together, certain forms must be established and obedience to them must be compelled. We must drive the money changers from the temple even as the Christ drove them in his day. In connection with all the frailties of human nature he was supremely charitable. The only ones he ever judged harshly or ever really condemned, so far as we have any record at least, were those who bound burdens on other men's backs, who never raised even a finger to make them lighter, who sought ever to gain advantage at another's disadvantage, who oppressed or who robbed the people. When we put forth the restraining hand to hold in check or to drive completely out of business men who rend and tear the flesh from other men, simply that they may gorge themselves, not that they need food, then we will manifest somewhat the wisdom and insight that were manifested by him, who understood so fully our common human nature that he was all compassion and forgiveness for all save those who oppressed, who made burdens heavier, who sought for advantage to another's disadvantage. I know it is a fascinating game, this financial game. I also know well that great law of life, that we grow into the likeness of those things we habitually contemplate. As is one's dominating thought, so his life becomes. As within, so without simply the direct law of cause and effect. I therefore know that the game with some natures becomes so fascinating and so irresistible that they are carried to depths and extremes that they never even contemplated at the start. To reach out and gain an additional million now and then that he does not earn, but by hook and crook, by gaining or taking some manifestly unfair advantage, by a contemptuous defiance, or by a brazen, open violation of law, or by a process of indirect murder, as many a million among us has been gained, and the greater shame upon us as a people becomes fascinating and well nigh irresistible. But where men are absolutely incapable of exercising self-restraint, but are given to excesses and crimes that are not only detrimental to society, but are destructive to the very forces that hold society together, then it is clearly our duty to deal with such by way of restraint the same as we restrain the lesser criminal. The point is simply this: we must stop recognizing men and groups of men who are engaged in these practices as among our successful and representative citizens. We must look upon these rich men without moral sense, consumed by greed, devoid of scruples and utterly contemptuous of the rights of the people, as the oppressors, as the lawbreakers, as the criminals that they actually are. We must deal with them by way of restraint in exactly the same manner as we deal with all other types of criminals. It is only by treatment such as this that we can hope to cope with this type, this most dangerous type of criminal that has become so rampant and so bold and so brazen among us. Just as sensible to attempt to kill an elephant or retard his progress with a pop gun and its attendant paper wads, as to try to head off or to keep even with the corrupt and criminal practices that these men and federated groups of men are constantly operating under, by meting out to them the penalty of a fine, either nominal or heavy. In addition to the possession of these weapons, one of the most significant features of the way the people will win out in the great battles that are now on for a clean, a truly representative, and a continually advancing government, is the type of young men that are now coming into the field of political action, both as voters and as men who will stand for and who will be elected to public office. Here lies one of the most encouraging and significant features or facts of the times. Already in some sections they are throwing out their battle lines, and some of the old-time and hitherto secure bosses and machine managers are fighting with a desperate chance to retain their hold. Some are already down and out, others are rapidly on the way. What has occurred at a few points already is enough, as I have heard it aptly put, to drive the old-time apostle of regularity to drink or to suicide. Some of the old-time bosses and machine managers as well as machine wards are already believing in their vague superstitious bewilderment that the methods of hell have broken loose and have crossed the border, and others that hell even is crazy. They are asking, what next? And wondering where the next blow will fall. To the young man who will consent to stand for or who will aspire to public office, I would say, be sufficiently wise and far-sighted as not to aim for or not to stop at the politician's stage. You will have to dirty your fingers continually, and you will have to lower your ideals and your whole trend of life if you do. You will have to associate with and have as your constant and many times unwelcome companions dirty and selfish and scheming men. You will take your orders from a boss, you will become subservient to him. He will keep you as long as he and his like have use for you. Association and like trends of thought will in time mold you into his likeness. You may sink to his level and in time become a boss, a parasite now rapidly becoming despicable in the public estimation, but the chances are that you will get so far and no farther. You will thereby set your own limitations, and in latter years you will confess that your life is a disappointment, as it will indeed be to your family and to all of your intimate friends. If the stuff is in you, then I beg of you to strike for the higher ground. If the stuff is in you, you may reach the statesman stage, but you will reach it only by never making a deal whereby honor is sacrificed, and by being far-sighted enough and brave and resolute enough to stand uncompromisingly for such measures of public policy and such methods of party management as are always for the people's greatest good. If then the stuff is in you, if you are wise and resourceful, you needn't bother so much about retaining the people's support, about retaining hold on your position. The people will attend to that. We need more such men. We need more such young men that the people find it a pleasure and a duty to support. We need more such young men to come from our farms, which contain today one of the most interesting and promising sets of young men in the entire world. We need more such young men from our workshops and from all the ranks of labor. We need more from the ranks of the wealthy and economically independent. We need more such young men to come from our colleges and universities. We are able to recognize such men when they are really to be found. There is nothing that so takes hold of men, that so challenges their admiration, that so compels their respect and their support as downright honesty of purpose, as a courage that compels a man to stand firmly or to drive on until he accomplishes what an upright soul that will make no compromise with dishonor compels. Such men compel the support of the people that lesser and compromising and timid men continually seek. Does this not give us hope for the future of our country and institutions? Does it not give us renewed faith in our old human nature that we have so many times questioned? Does it not give us a renewed faith for the future of the race? Again, to the young man entering or contemplating entering political life, if you have contemplated employing the methods first enumerated and stopping at the politician stage, then think again and be wise and keep out altogether. Stay in the workshop, on the farm, at your business, your profession, and have thereby a more satisfactory life, and a life of more value to your fellow men than it would be if you entered politics on this basis. If, however, you have the material in you and a determination sufficient to measure up to the stature of the statesman, then, for God's sake, go into political life, and stay in if you can, as long as a well-rounded life will permit. You could do no nobler thing. The time has come, and it should have come long ago, to put these machines and bosses, these crooks, and these traitors of the country out of business. We have indeed come face to face with a crisis in our political life as great as has ever existed from the days of the colonies to the present time. The call of the country goes out to every decent man and woman as urgent as has ever gone out. The call to service of great armies of patriotic and determined men and women is loud and insistent, and no service has ever been rendered of greater import and of greater need than we are called upon to render. It is a service of a type different from that has called, and that has been nobly responded to before, but it is just as sorely needed and just as praiseworthy. Leaders who have the insight to discern and to hunt out, and the courage to battle against these agents of political and business degradation are coming rapidly to the front. They need our sympathy and our confidence. They need our quick and active support and cooperation. It is how the average citizen bears himself in this crisis that is to determine its outcome. Therefore, after all is said and done, no man can longer be a decent citizen. He may be a thoroughly good man, but no longer a decent citizen who does not interest himself, inform himself, and join with or lead in this great fight that is to rid our body politic of these costly, degrading, damnable influences. We of the East would do well to turn for instruction and inspiration along these lines to many portions of the great Middle and Far West. They are already ahead of us in many things and in nothing, perhaps, more than along these political and business regenerating lines. It is only those who come or who have come in close contact with these portions of the nation, and with the teeming, untrammeled, independently thinking and acting life there, that realize at all adequately this fact. The decadent East will truly express the situation unless we here are quickly up and doing. Direct legislation through the initiative and referendum, through the agency of direct nominations by the people, and through that long-range rifle, the recall, has already put down and out some of the most thoroughly entrenched and notorious political machines and bosses and have brought the people's rule and business affairs back into their own hands. In regard to one of the most recent occurrences, a leading New York paper in an editorial hints that the smashing of the bosses of one state by means of the weapon, the direct primary, may help to explain why the New York bosses dread it as the devil does holy water. 9. The great nation, its people, its powers, its possibilities. The greater nation. There never has been, and from the very nature of human nature there never can be, a truly great and long-lived nation where one class of people rule, and another class or the other classes are ruled. The great nation is that alone in which the people rule, where through their agent the state or government they attend to their own affairs, and where they do not allow others to attend to their affairs for them. Government must be thoroughly and truly representative, or those in power will gradually get the agents of administration and of production so under their control, and will so use them for their own gain and their continually increasing powers, that in time the very liberties of the people will be stolen away. Of late, we have been having some very direct revelations of the actual conditions of government in Russia, where a group of eminently respectable and high-born gentlemen, among them no less than an august company of Grand Dukes, have for many years been directing the affairs in a sense, ruling this nation of considerably over 100 million people. Some own as high as a dozen or more palaces, all splendidly or even sumptuously equipped, with annual incomes reaching into the millions. This all comes from the people of Russia, chiefly the working people. What their condition is, late events have also revealed to the world, and more clearly than ever before. The hopeless state of inefficiency that this governing class has kept the nation in, and has prevented it from rising out of, the whole world now knows. But the people of Russia, I hear it said, have not yet attained their freedom, and so are not able to prevent other men ruling over them, notwithstanding the state of affairs that such a system means. Very true, but there is another truth perhaps even more significant for us. There have been nations where the people have fought for and have won their freedom, but where through lack of due vigilance, and by reason of the growing and in time mastering greed of privileged and excessive wealth, their liberties have been stolen away, and their country, of which they were formerly proud, has through the inevitable resultant internal decay fallen into the hands of the despoiler. The greed for gain becomes so powerful that unless the great common people find some way of checking or controlling it, those that become mastered by it will pillage the very liberties of their country as quickly as they will loot a hospital train. Recent developments in our own nation, even within the last 12 months, have clearly demonstrated that there are among us, men of otherwise high standing, eminently respectable, in learning, in church standing, in society, but who have gotten so under the drunken sway of the greed for gain that they would not only loot a hospital train, but also a funeral train were the prospective inducements sufficiently large, and were the chances of not being discovered at it of a sufficiently rosy hue. Plain speaking. But a man who will cause or connive at death for gain, and many a death has been caused by the scheming, the cunning and the depredations of some of those we term financiers, even within the past few months, is indeed worse in his depredations than the one who will despoil the dead. The law of disintegration and destruction never sleeps, and only eternal vigilance can check it. Every age brings its own dangers, and those that come stealthily are frequently more fatal than those that come with a mighty noise. Instead of an armed foe that we can meet on the field, there is today an enemy that is invisible, but everywhere at work destroying our institutions. That enemy is corruption. It seeks to direct official action, it dictates legislation and endeavors to control the construction of laws. The flag has been praised at champagne dinners, while the very pole from which it floated was being eaten off by corruption, and republican institutions were being stabbed to the vitals. A new gospel has come among us, according to which it is mean to rob a hen roost or a hen, but plundering thousands makes us gentlemen. As there can be no great nation without government by the people, so there can be no great nation without a continual vigilance on the part of the people. Vigilance is the price that must ever be paid for continued liberty. Equal advantages and opportunities for all, which is fundamental in any great nation, without active vigilance on the part of the people will be quietly and craftily changed into privilege for the few to be enriched through the toil of the many. And as wealth increases wealth, and power increases power, we can readily see how privilege and its concomitant, oppression, has in time spelled destruction to so many former states. The fact that we have so much to read from history, and so clearly and so repeatedly, makes me so full of hope that there is coming among us a people's movement that is to redeem and save this nation. And certainly there is now no power of any other nature that can do it. Moreover, this movement must not be unduly delayed, for concentrated wealth and privilege are growing with such gigantic strides that every year, or now, even every month of delay, on account of their continually growing entrenchments, makes the people's task more and more difficult. The great nation, putting it in another form, is that in which the people realize the fact that they are not separate from or apart from government, but that they, in a sense, are government. It is indeed strange, where this is not a part of the active consciousness of the people, what a little group of men and families is able to do in gaining control of the agencies and necessities upon which the welfare or even the very life of the people depends. And nothing has been more clearly and more repeatedly demonstrated in the history of nations than the fact that he who owns or controls that upon which others depend, owns or controls them also. It is possible for there to be a nation of slaves without the word slave or any word of a kindred nature ever being used. The more shrewd and cunning the owners, the more careful will they be to see that no word or sign or mark describing the actual condition of those owned or controlled be used or even hinted. Where the people are keen and alert as to who and what they are in relation to government, or rather what government is in relation to them, there will be found a people who see to it that every opportunity is given to those who aim to do right. Such a people will see that among the great mass of their toilers, upon whose sturdy welfare and good keeping the very welfare and ability of the nation to progress, or to continue even to exist at all, depends, there are not untold thousands who are working from early to late year in and year out, getting merely or barely enough for each day's work to provide them with food and clothing and shelter that they may be on hand for tomorrow's work, and tomorrow's lives devoid of all learning and art and leisure and hope, and even rest those elements that are so essential to any life that is not the life of the slave. This does not conduce to that intelligent and progressive and happy citizenship that makes for a real nation of freemen. The great nation is, again, that in which the agencies of production and especially those that come under the head of natural monopolies, those things upon which all the people depend are owned and administered as nearly as is possible by their agent, the state, and so administered for the good and the welfare of all, and are not permitted to be monopolized by the few for their own enormous enrichment, and therefore, at the expense of the great mass of the people. It is the private ownership or control of these, as we have seen, that has permitted the growth of our enormously rich men and families that are becoming so entrenched that they are now a menace to the very life of a nation of freemen. The great nation is not that where through this unnatural use of these common belongings we have a small class of rich and powerful men living in their castles and their villas with great hordes of hirelings or dependents about them. This is something in regard to which history's lesson is most clearly written. The nation with which we are dealing is, again, the one quick to see its weaknesses, also the danger of running into and working in ruts, or remaining in ways that were once advisable and reasonable, but where the time has long since passed for it to continue in these ways, and where a continued growth and advancement, to say nothing of its even holding its own, demands that it keep up with the process of evolution and growth that is ever working to lift the minds and the hearts of men, and hence their relations, to continually higher planes. It is also the nation that is alive and keen to the lessons that can be learned from other nations and peoples. Many times the younger nations where great concentrations of wealth with its debauchery of the agencies of government on the one hand, and its oppression on the other, have not yet gotten a foothold, and which therefore are filled with men and women of lofty purpose and ambitions for a nation better than has yet been, have commendable features that the older ones can adopt and adapt to their own institutions with great advantage. The welfare of the great nation depends above all things, perhaps, upon the general intelligence of its people, and the more general and widespread this intelligence the greater, the happier, and the more enduring the nation. That it cannot be an intelligence and education on the part of the few, while ignorance or a lack of intelligence holds among the larger numbers, has been shown most clearly in connection with nations that were once among the great, but that are not now known except in history, or that have fallen from their place among the ablest to a position among the backward and the unimportant. Free and open educational opportunities for all, for the poorest as well as the richest, is undoubtedly the best road to a general diffusion of intelligence among the people. It is possible to have widespread educational facilities and still for there to be whole armies of children numbering into the thousands of thousands or into the millions, who, on account of carelessness or greed or incapacity on the part of parents, or other causes, are deprived until it is too late, of what should be the privilege, and more, the right, the sacred right, of every child. The state must see to it more carefully than it does, that attendance at school, or some adequate means of education, be made more carefully and more generally compulsory than it now is. That army of nearly 2 million child laborers from 5 to 15 years of age, who are this very day toiling in our mills and sweatshops and factories and mines, must be relieved that they too may have the equipment in mind and in body sufficient to enable them to enter upon the plane of life's activities with opportunities somewhat equal to the other millions of the same ages. We have an excellent free educational system in the United States, but it is to a great extent, and far more perhaps than we realize, offset by this denial of opportunity to this great army of rapidly coming citizens, who most of all need these opportunities to enable them to have anything like a fair chance in their struggles for a self-supporting competency, or even for existence at all. Greed for gain, and clearly illegitimate gain, will prove triumphant and will stifle the higher promptings of the nation's heart, unless we compel every man running a parasitic business or enterprise to be decent. To what purpose then is our age of invention? Why these machines at all, if they do not help to lift care from the soul and burden from the back? To what purpose is our age of enlightenment, if, just to cover our nakedness, we establish among us a barbarism that overshadows the barbarism of the savage cycle? Is this the wisdom of the wise? Is this the Christianity we boast of and parade in benighted Madagascar and unsaved Malabar? Is this what our orators mean when they jubilate over civilization and the progress of the species? And why do these children know no rest, no play, no learning, nothing but the grim grind of existence? Is it because we are all naked and shivering? Is it because there is sudden destitution in the land? Is it because pestilence walks at noonday? Is it because war's red hand is pillaging our storehouses and burning our cities? No, forsooth. Never before were the storehouses so crammed to bursting with bolts and bales of every warp and woof. No, forsooth. The children, while yet in the gristle, are ground down that a few more useless millions may be heaped up. We boast that we are leading the commercialism of the world, and we grind in our mills the bones of the little ones to make good our boast. What avail our exports, our tariffs, our dividends, if they rise out of these treasons against God? All gains are losses, all riches are poverties, so long as the soul is left to rot down. Asterisk. There are golden opportunities for earnest men and women to enter upon a determined work in every one of our states until conditions along these lines in every one of them are what they should be. Magnificent work has already been and is being done on the part of many, the help of more, those who have a singleness of purpose that does not stop even in the face of defeats until the thing is done, is sorely needed. But outside of this great army of children at work at that important period when they should be getting their equipment for life's work and duties, many times at the expense of great bodily injury as well as intellectual and moral, there are almost unbelievingly large numbers that are in school but very little, and still others that are there none at all. Every child in school until a certain age or until a sufficient equipment to meet the ordinary duties of life is reached, should be the nation's motto. It is also eminently fitting that something be said of the quality of the education it is proposed to make compulsory attendance upon universal. To come at once to the point in mind, and briefly training of the intellect alone is not sufficient, we shall remain a long way off from the ideal until we make moral, humane, heart training a far more important feature of our educational systems than we have made it thus far. We are advancing in this respect, but we have great advances yet to make. Kindness and consideration, sympathy and fraternity, love of justice, the full and ready willingness to give it as well as to demand it, the clear-cut comprehension of the majesty and beauty that escapes into the life of the individual as he understands and appropriates to himself the all-embracing contents of the Golden Rule. The training of the intellect alone at the expense of the humanities has made or has enlarged the power of many a criminal, many a usurper of other men's homes and property, many an oppressor, and has thereby added poison and desolation to his own life as well as to the lives of those with whom he has come in contact and who have felt his blighting and withering influence. It is also chiefly from those without this training, that great body of our fellow creatures which we term the animal world, receive their most thoughtless and cruel treatment, and perhaps from among none more than among the fashionable rich. I think there is another feature in our educational systems that we would do wisely to give more attention to. In a nation of free institutions, more attention could wisely be given to systematic and concrete instruction in connection with the institutions of government, and in connection with this a training in civic pride that sees to it that our public offices are filled with men of at least ordinary honesty and integrity, men who regard public office as a public trust worthy the service of their highest manhood, rather than with those whose eye is single to the largest amount of loot and graft that comes within the range of their vision and the reach of their hand. Such a system would in time spell the end of Tammany Hall, a democratic organization in New York City, whose chief object is to make politics a cover to divert the largest possible sums of money from the people of the city of New York to line the pockets, and in great abundance, of those in control of the body of loot. It would in time spell the end of the Republican rings and halls whose object and purpose is identically the same in every city where they have been able to gain control, as well as the Democratic rings in cities other than New York. The methods of the rings of the one are equally black with the methods of the rings of the other, where the motives are the same, the resultant action is the same. Our educational methods are developing. In educational work are some of our noblest, ablest, foremost men and women. There is an element of the practical, the useful, that is now sort of remodeling our earlier methods. It has always seemed to me that not only in our public schools but in our colleges and universities, it is possible to get as great a degree of training from branches that are in themselves useful, that will be of actual use later on, as out of those that are used for their training value only. The element of the useful, not at the expense of the training, but combined with it, should be, I think, and is coming to be, the marked feature of our developing educational methods. The bread and butter problem will be the problem of practically all in our common or public schools today. There probably will not be 1 in 1,000 whose problem it will not be. To make our educational systems so that they will be of the greatest practical aid to all as they enter upon life's activities should be one of our greatest aims. That our college courses can be improved to at least from 20 to 40% along this same line I am fully persuaded, in addition to the saving of considerable valuable time for those who, contemplating professional careers, will afterwards have to spend a considerable period in professional schools. When we consider that not more than 0.1% of those in our common schools ever get as far as the college or university, we can see how important it is that every child be guaranteed what the law of the most ordinary justice demands, that he or she have the benefit at least of what will enable him or her to enter upon the stage of young manhood and young womanhood free from such tremendous handicaps with which so many are entering upon it today. Our higher educational institutions especially must be brought and must be kept in more intimate and more sympathetic relations with the common life. Here lies their great opportunity. By this also will be determined their continual growth and their real standing. The tendency towards exclusiveness and even snobbishness that is already plainly manifesting itself in some of our older and wealthier institutions must be checked or driven completely from them for the good of those who otherwise would become snobs as well as for the good name and standing of the institution itself. For a college man or woman to get or to entertain the idea that he or she is of a quality at all different from all other ordinary intelligent people is a mental malady that occasionally makes consummate asses of some. Most all get over it in time, but it has a decidedly crippling influence while it lasts. Sensible and to the point are the words in the following brief extracts from a recent notable address by President Woodrow Wilson. After expressing the opinion that our churches of today are very far from adequately serving the masses of the people, he said, "They have more regard for the pew rents than for men's souls. They are depressing the level of Christian endeavor. It is the same with the universities. We look for the support of the wealthy and neglect our opportunities to serve the people. It is for this reason the state university is held in popular approval, while the privately supported institution to which we belong is coming to suffer a corresponding loss of esteem." While attending a recent Lincoln celebration, I asked myself if Lincoln would have been as serviceable to the people of this country had he been a college man, and I was obliged to say to myself that he would not. The processes to which the college man is subjected do not render him serviceable to the country as a whole. It is for this reason that I have dedicated every power in me to a democratic regeneration. The American college must become saturated in the same sympathies as the common people. The colleges of this country must be reconstructed from the top to the bottom. The American people will tolerate nothing that savors of exclusiveness. Their political parties are going to pieces. They are busy with their moral regeneration and they want leaders who can help them to accomplish it. The great nation is a religious nation. In order that it be truly religious, it is necessary that there be no recognized or established religion, that there be no relation, or rather connection between church and state. It is so easy to confound particulars with essentials. The essential, fundamental principle, indeed the sum and substance of all true religion, is the consciousness of God in the soul of man. To come into the conscious living realization of the fact that the spirit of infinite life and power that is back of all, working in and through all, the life of all, is the life of our life, that there is no life and no power outside of it, and that in it we live and move and have our being, to live and to act always in this thought and this realization, is the religious life. Without it one may belong to 1,000 churches, or subscribe to the creeds of infinite varieties of man-made religious systems, but without this, one cannot be in the religious life. To dwell consciously and continually in this life, and thus allow it to manifest through us, is love to God. To recognize it as the life of every other being, manifesting in different stages of divine unfoldment, gives us the real basis for love of the fellow man. This marks also the difference between the getting and the giving religion, for it is true in religion that we can get only as we give, the same as is the law in regard to happiness. The people of the great nation is a patriotic people, it is an intensely patriotic people. I read from the dictionary a definition of patriot: one who loves his country, and supports its interests. Through lack of discrimination we have done great violence to the word patriotism in the past. In its name many foolish things have been done. Most unpatriotic and most ungodly things have been done in its name, though many times innocently done. We have allowed ourselves to be swayed by the politicians' patriotism, by the capitalist looters' patriotism, by the demagogic, self-seeking, self-constituted labor leaders' patriotism. They all spring from the same common ground: self-seeking at the expense of everything that is conducive to the highest public welfare. As a people, however, we are gaining wonderfully in discriminating power. As a consequence, a new order of patriotism is coming into being and among us. What was at one time confined to the few brave, independent, advanced men, is now becoming common among the people. We are finding that the elements of justice and righteousness, fraternity and godliness, have a very direct relation to, or rather, that patriotism has a very direct relation to them. War, and the flag, were at one time supposed to be the only agents with which patriotism was linked. To hurrah for the flag and to be eager to go to the front when the war bugle sounded, or were likely to sound, was for a long period a prevailing idea of patriotism. It may still be a way in which patriotism may be manifested. The people are learning the real cause of many wars, indeed the great majority of them the bullheadedness or pig-headedness, the incapacity on the part of those having to do with affairs, and again, the throwing of an entire nation into war by large and powerful though unscrupulous financial interests solely for gain. These two agents are responsible for the great bulk, indeed for 9 out of every 10, of all modern wars, even as they have been for all time past. Men are beginning to realize that instead of having anything to do with this type of war, patriotism lies in refusing absolutely to aid or abet it and in using one's influence in a similar way among one's neighbors more blunt and with less power of discernment. When we reach a point where the large body of citizens see to it that these men and their agents for the large financial interests of the unscrupulous type almost invariably work through agents many of whom they place or have the people place in public positions when, I repeat, the larger body of citizens see to it that these men and their agents are kept out of public office, and relegate them to the subordinate place where they rightly belong, then we will witness the full birth of an entirely new and a higher order of patriotism that is soon to be dominant among us. The highest patriotism that I know is that which impels a man to be honest, kind, hence thoughtful, in all his business relations and in his daily life, that impels him to the primary and to give attention to those features of our political institutions that are of even greater consequence than his casting his vote on election day, that impels him to think, and to be discriminating in his thought, that enables him to be not afraid to point out and denounce the pure self-seeker and his demagogic ways, be he in public life, in the ranks of high-standing financiers, or in the ranks of organized labor, or in the ranks of the common life. The man whose motto is not my country, be she right or be she wrong, but always my country, but, my country, be she always in the right, and if not in the right then God give me the wisdom and the courage to work as a patriot to help bring her into the right, and then may she have every God-given aid that she may prevail. Such is the patriot. A continually and rapidly growing number of men of this stamp are appearing among us. Thus patriotism is witnessing the new birth. It is this patriotism in the common life that is of the high quality. Men who are industrious and honest in their work, who are faithful to whatever tasks are imposed upon them, who are as eager to give justice as to demand it, who are working industriously and intelligently in order to take care of themselves and those dependent upon them, and thus remain self-supporting members of the community, who remain brave and sweet in their natures and who abide always in faith in face of the hard or uncertain times that come at some time or another and in some form or another into the lives of every one of us, who are jealous of their country's honor, and of the administration of its internal affairs, for in the life of the nation as in the life of the individual, all life is from within out, and as is the inner so always will be the outer. These, I repeat, are the men and these are the conditions that are giving birth to that new and that higher order of patriotism that is now coming among us, and that is to take captive the hearts and that is to animate the lives of men. That wars in the past have been, and even at the present time are, too frequent, all thinking men and women are agreed. That they are in the great majority of cases entirely inexcusable, and that there is and should be very little use for military forces, if any, outside of purposes of defense, the highest and most intelligent portion of our citizenship thoroughly believes. And so far as effectiveness is concerned it has been proven time and again, that a citizen soldiery is the finest in the world. Neither vast bodies of men drawn off from creative and productive enterprises and made into a professional soldier class, nor bodies of hirelings, but men who are citizens of intelligence and training, and who stand with the ear ready for the call to arms when there is just cause for their hearing this call, such are the intelligent, such are the brave and the daring, such are the most effective. Men will not fight effectively for the little price in money they are paid. They will not fight effectively for the glory of another, nor will they fight effectively for a mere tract of land. But where homes are, and institutions that they love and revere and care for, then men will fight with all that triumphant intelligence and all that indomitable daring that it is possible to call forth. With the citizen soldiery ready at the just moment to come from the mine, the mill, the counting house, the farm, thousands of thousands or millions strong, why should there be a vast professional soldiery, a great non-producing class kept primarily for the glory and to do the bidding of a ruling class, but supported almost entirely by the great common people? That is true of the foolhardy military systems of various European countries today. Then think of the women and children by the thousands working in the fields by the side of horses and oxen, and then these vast armies of non-producers, and for whose benefit? Royalty, privilege, capitalism in government always depend upon the military arm for their support and, at times, even for their continued existence. When their demands become too great, however, and too much dead or deadbeat timber is thrown before the car of progress, then even the soldiery itself throws down its arms and goes back to the ranks and to the cause of the people whence they came. The only excuse for the present gigantic military systems that are in existence today is that out of the ruling classes there have not yet come men of sufficient brains and wisdom to meet with similar men from other nations, and come to a sane and common sense understanding regarding their relations. From the people, as democracy grows, and whether it take the name or not, are coming men and forces that will yet break this hellish monstrosity to 1,000 pieces and will send these millions of men back to the mills, to the farms, back to the homes, that they may be as they should be, producers and equal sharers in the support of their country. No, it's intelligence and something to fight for that constitutes the effective in distinction from the ineffective army or navy. Reference has been made in this part to Russia and the condition of her people, the result of allowing one class to attend to the affairs of the others in matters of government. This gives us the basis for an observation regarding her army and navy in view of somewhat recent events. Her navy was larger and supposedly superior to that of her adversary, but the larger portion of it soon littered the bottom of the sea, and it went there because of the superior intelligence and hence ability of a people whose government aims to make intelligence the common possession of the people. Her army was virtually defeated in every engagement, chiefly through the lack of ability on the part of its officers, for the higher ability cannot be grown on such soil, and through the lack of intelligent and hardy service on the part of her common soldiery. And this because men who are denied opportunities for the growth of intelligence and who have no homes, but who pay excessive tolls and taxes and fees to others, can have neither the power nor the spirit of those who have such opportunities and who have homes. But the deliverance of these, the patient Russian people, out of the hell which results when the people allow themselves to be ruled instead of taking the management of their affairs into their own hands, is near at hand. There will now be no final settlement and no end, until bureaucracy, czarism, and holy synods are relegated to the place it is a wonder they were not relegated to years ago, and a free and delivered people will stand as the representatives of a new nation. The same forces in power in government that would deny freedom, or that would take freedom from the people, strangle all vitality and life even from the church, so that it becomes a curse and a drawback instead of a blessing. And the struggling masses must suffer through the greed of their rulers, who talk patriotism, but never draw a sword themselves in defense of their country. But, it is said, suppose the ruler went to the front and harm or death befell him, what then for the country? Nonsense, there isn't a king or an emperor ruling today whose place could not be filled most ably were he to fall on the field of battle, by 100 or 1,000 men from his own country, and in many cases it must be truthfully said, more ably. How often also do those that in legislative halls of whatever nation talk and vote for war go to the front themselves? Probably not 1 in 1,000. Were those who instigate or who vote for it compelled to go, war would be most infrequent. So often those that talk the loudest of patriotism in its ordinary sense are the greatest of cowards. Hasten the day, which should have come long ago, when no war can be declared except through a plebiscite of the people. So far then as the soldiery of a nation is concerned, let the interests of all the people be equally taken care of, let there be institutions founded upon justice, upon equal opportunities for all and special privileges for no man, let there be homes and sentiment encircling these homes, and the keeping up of a large military system becomes but a fool's dream. There will come from such a people a citizen soldiery more intelligent, more brave and determined, and therefore more effective, than can ever come from any professional fighting class, and at a cost not 100th part as great. Take sentiment from the battlefield and you take its chief source of heroism away. The people of homes and of just institutions are a people of sentiment. Upon every cartridge box and upon every rifle and upon every field piece of such a soldiery the word invincible could most rightly be stamped. But of such people and such soldiers let it be said to you, unscrupulous financial jugglers, rulers, and grand dukes, beware, for the people are now beginning to know your tricks. They know that me and mine, and the ever-ready mockery of a trumped-up patriotism is written all over you, and that had you your way, you would continue to make dog soldiers out of great bodies of your fellow men, you would feed their bodies to the vultures and leave their families to weep in sorrow and cry for bread, that you might add to your already excessive and dishonorable gain, and continue to live in luxury even to your own and your descendants' moral and physical deterioration and destruction. The nations of the world present at the present time the appearance of a vast armed camp. In addition to the large armies there are the vast navies being added to continually and at enormous expense. To the former cruiser and battleship is added the dreadnought, and to the dreadnought is added the super dreadnought. One nation no sooner projects and lays the keel of a monster engine of destruction of its type than another announces one still larger and more costly. And in this age of rapid and marvelous invention, when one thing is superseded by another so rapidly, it is probably not far from fact that 9/10 of all these will be antiquated and will become junk before they are ever used for the purpose for which they are planned. And why all this feverish preparation, this fear of something, this monumental expenditure? Is it that any one of these nations is planning attack upon any other friendly nation? Is it that any nation is actually fearing attack from any other friendly nation? All sensible people know that neither condition really exists. There has never been a period in the entire world's history when nations and people have understood and known each other better and have been at heart more thoroughly at peace with each other. There has never been a time when trade and commerce and business relations of all types between them have been greater and more valuable, and when their disruption by war would be more costly, more senseless, and more wicked. Never would a war between any two nations be more deprecated and more bitterly opposed by the people of those nations. Why then is this feverish and inexplicable increasing of armaments, this enormous taxation of the people? At the same time, there was never a period when the principle of arbitration, of orderly and sensible court proceeding in the adjusting and settling of differences was more thoroughly believed in and more rapidly growing. In view of the above facts, why can we not have immediately within the coming 2 or 3 years an international court of arbitration composed of representatives, of judges duly appointed from the nations of the world, with powers to pass upon and settle all disputes or all differences that may arise between nations, using the present joint military and naval forces, greatly reduced, as the police force, to compel, if necessary, the enforcement of its decisions? The fact of there being such a force for such a purpose would in all probability do away with the necessity of its being ever called upon for action. We are coming to just such a course. The question is, why not come to it now? Why not be emancipated from this enormous and thoroughly senseless expense that the people of practically all nations are being constantly taxed to meet? Why not now bring an end to this feverish, foundationless bogey of fear or uncertainty that pervades the otherwise peaceful status of this world? The people of all nations would welcome such a deliverance. We wait simply for the initiative of a leader in power progressive enough, brave enough, devoted enough to take the necessary steps. We are ready for such a leader, for such a course. I venture that the people of no nation will stand for the rejection of such a move on the part of those in power, when the matter is wisely formulated and presented. The following splendid utterance of President Taft was made at a recent memorable gathering, and it shows how near we are getting to the landing. Personally, I do not see why matters of national honor should not be referred to a court of arbitration than matters of property or of natural proprietorship. I know that is going further than most men are willing to go, but I do not see why questions of honor may not be submitted to a tribunal composed of men of honor who understand questions of national honor, to abide by their decision, as well as any other questions of difference arising between nations. In a recent able article, Mr. Andrew Carnegie says of the above, here is the inspired deliverance before the Peace and Arbitration Society in New York on the 22nd of March, 1910, which we believe will remain memorable for untold ages, and give the author rank among the immortals as one of the foremost benefactors of his race. While I cannot agree that the above is quite true as regards the one who gives utterance to these thoughts, splendid and true as they are, for they are after all the thoughts that the great majority of clear-thinking and sensible people everywhere are now thinking, I can agree that it is preeminently true of the man who has the insight, the inspiration, the ability, and the moral fiber sufficient to take the necessary steps to bring about the material embodiment of such thoughts, plainly speaking, the establishment of a permanent international court of arbitration. Has President Taft these qualities? We do not yet know that he has not. The name of the one who has will be among the most memorable and beloved of the entire world's history. The great nation opens its ports and extends a welcoming hand to the poor, to the economically and politically downtrodden, as well as to the more well-to-do, from all the nations of the world. It just as carefully, on the other hand, closes its doors to the criminal, and to all other types of the undesirables that seek entrance, or that are dumped upon its shores by the authorities of other communities and nations. The emigration problem of this, our nation, is today one of the most vital and one fraught with the gravest possibilities of any problem that we are at present called upon to face. At the present time there are coming into our ports each 12 months over 1 million emigrants. Large numbers of these are most desirable and will prove of great value to the nation. Many again, are not only thoroughly undesirable, but are a distinct menace to our established institutions of law and order and a burden to the community and the state in which they live. Many are also a menace to the lives and the property of individual American citizens, and are costing us already vast sums annually. There are among these an increasingly large number that come for the purpose of crime and plunder. Then there are various steamship companies that have their agents by the hundreds in the countries from which many of these are coming, presenting every type of inducement to those among whom they work to come to America, their sole purpose being the passage money that will come to the steamship company, and without a single thought or care as to the detriment and the cost that large numbers of them will be to the nation. We should extend a welcoming hand to the honest, thrifty peasant wanting to better his condition, and especially those wanting to find or to make homes here, but we should see to it, and at once, that the diseased, the pauper, the criminal is not dumped upon our various communities to be cared for or to be dealt with. The proper federal authorities should, with the least possible delay, adopt some well-defined policy looking to the safeguarding of American citizenship and American institutions in the face of this now thoroughly well-recognized condition. In the meantime, our existing emigration laws should be enforced to the limit in reference to these thoroughly undesirable types, that either come of their own accord or that are sent to us. The great nation again is the nation where that most important class in its makeup, that upon which it depends more than upon any other, that forms so to speak the backbone of its organism, the farming community, grows and prospers, and has its interests looked after and looks after its own interests more and more. It is to my mind the most natural and normal life there is, and the one as a general statement that is or that can be made the most happy, and the most satisfactory, and in honor second to none. There has perhaps never been a better outlook for a prosperous and interesting country life than at the present time. The great advances that are being made possible through the splendid work of our various federal and state bureaus, as well as of the numerous agricultural and horticultural schools and experiment stations, the convenience and added comforts of continually better roads, the telephone, the free rural mail delivery, the now rapidly coming parcels post, better facilities for marketing, increasing possibilities of products as well as better prices for them all are tending to make its advantages very great. Many of these, moreover, are still in their infancy, and the time is unquestionably coming when the scientifically tilled and managed farm of 40 acres will yield in profit what is now yielded by the ordinary farm of 160 acres. The farmers of the future will also be giving more attention to making their farms, especially the home, its grounds, and immediate surroundings, more beautiful and attractive. Farms that today are anything but attractive could be made so thoroughly so with a little time and attention and with but little actual outlay, that the boys and girls could scarcely be driven from them. In addition to these greater gains, such a course would pay also abundantly from the purely business standpoint. The wiser among those on our farms will also see to it that every labor-saving device and convenience is instituted in and about the home, the same as so many others are on the farm itself, that the work and the life of the wife and the daughter may be made as easy and as attractive as possible, giving more abundant opportunities for variety, for rest, for recreation, and for culture. It will pay 1,000-fold in the end. Then with more cooperation, no farm or rural community should be without some strong cooperative organization in its midst for business, for social, for educational, for civic purposes. The possibilities of farm and country life will be continually increasing. The influence that such a population can exert upon the political life of the nation is indeed unmeasurable. There is already a growing tendency, and I believe that it will be and should be a continually increasing tendency, for young men of ability and ambition to remain on the farm, instead of leaving it for supposedly superior callings, that is, unless the inclination or the aptitude lies so pronouncedly along a different line as to make another course abundantly advisable. Go then to the school, the college, the university, the agricultural, the horticultural school, and with this superior equipment, go back to conduct a superior type of farm. The outlet for your abilities will be equal to those abilities, both there and as occasion may arise. The possibilities of soil cultivation and all things allied to it under more careful, more scientific, intensive methods, are hardly even dreamed of today, notwithstanding the great strides that have been made during the past dozen years or so. And our legislative halls, state and national, have never called so loudly as they are calling today for men of such make-up as will yet come to them from these superior types of farms. Nothing, to my mind, could contribute more abundantly to the welfare of the country than the coming of increasingly large numbers of these into our legislative halls. There is perhaps no class that has suffered economically more from special privilege and maladministration, in short injustice, during the past 2 or 3 decades. In no way could these abuses be more effectively ended. In no way could a better balance be secured and preserved in all matters of legislative policy and in all matters of national conduct. May there be more organization, an ever-increasing intelligence, more interest in public affairs, and an ever greater determination to have a more equal share in the latter, on the part of this, the most important of our citizenship. The great nation is again the nation in which the man of great natural, executive, or financial ability finds contentment in a smaller amount of possessions for himself, and the larger contentment and satisfaction and joy in using that unusual ability in the service of, for the benefit of, his city, his state, the nation. The wonder is that more are not doing this already. What an influence a few such men could have, what results they could accomplish, what real riches they could bring into their lives through the riches they would bring into the lives of multitudes, what gratitude would go to them. What names. What memories. As men continue to see the small satisfaction there is in the possession of great ability of this nature, and in the possession of great wealth, when divorced from an adequate or even from an abundant connection with the interests and the welfare of their fellow men, and as they catch the undying truth of the great law of life as enunciated by one who, though he had not even where to lay his head, was greater than them all, he that is greatest among you shall be your servant, then they in company with all men will be the gainers. Think what could be accomplished in the nation along the lines we have been considering in this little volume by a company of such men devoted to such ends. A change is coming, and very rapidly. The time has already arrived when we will no longer look upon the possession of mere wealth or the ability to get it as deserving of any special distinction, and especially when the means adopted in its acquirement are other than those of absolute honor and rectitude. How significant are the following observations from the New York Outlook. Those who have fallen most completely under the spell of fortune hunting, and have been consumed by the fever of a pursuit which dries up the very sources of spiritual life, can no longer be blind to the fact that when great wealth ceases to be associated with character, honor, genius, or public respect, it is a very shabby substitute for the thing men once held it to be. There are hosts of honorable men of wealth, and there are large fortunes which have been honorably made, but so much brutal indifference to the rights of others, so much tyrannical use of power, so much arbitrary employment of privilege without a touch of genius, so much cynical indifference to human ties of all kinds, so much vulgar greed, have come to light, that the luster has very largely gone, and wealth, as a supreme prize of life, has immensely lost in attractive power. There are hosts of young men who are ambitious to be rich, but who are not willing to accept wealth on such terms. The price is too great, the bargain too hard. Men of exceptional executive and financial ability, raise yourselves to the standing point of real greatness and use these abilities to noble purposes and to undying ends instead of piling heaps of things that you'll soon have to leave and that may do those to whom they will go more harm than good. The times are changing, mankind is advancing and ascending to higher standing places, and it will be but a short time when your position, if maintained as at present, will be a very ordinary one or even a very low one in the public esteem, and so will be your memories. The Bishop of Exeter voices a well-nigh universal human cry at present when he says, "Give us men. Strong and stalwart ones. Men whom highest hope inspires. Men whom purest honor fires. Men who trample self beneath them. Men who make their country read them as her noble sons, worthy of their sires. Men who never shame their mothers. Men who never fail their brothers. True, however false are others. Give us men, I say again. Give us men." X. Some conditions that hold in Britain. A comparative study of British and American characteristics is to me exceedingly interesting, more so, perhaps, than between those of my own and those of any other country, owing, I dare say, to so many characteristics being similar in the two nations, while yet in many ways our differences are very marked. A comparison of our characteristics, those in which we meet closely and those wherein we differ widely, leads, and naturally, into another field of absorbing interest, the resultant similarities and differences, mostly differences between our national institutions, social, economic, educational, and our methods of procedure in matters of government. It is, however, impossible in a brief chapter, as this must be, to enter into any extended examination of these. Suffice it to say that in one respect we are very similar, in that in some matters in government we are very slow to right certain wrongs or injustices, or, in other words, we are prone to advance in some phases of legislation a great deal more tardily than it would be to our advantage to do. The cause, however, is different in the case of British governmental institutions and those of America. What the chief cause with us is, the preceding pages of this volume abundantly reveal. Briefly, and for the purpose immediately in hand, it is this: the average American citizen, because not yet pushed to it, and this on account of the newness of the country and its enormous natural resources, has been going along, attending to his own private work or business, and has been giving such inadequate time and attention to the affairs of his city, state, or nation, that little groups of individuals and corporations have quietly been getting hold of such enormous revenue-producing properties in the form of mines, lands, gifts in the form of public and semi-public franchises, by fair means and by foul, that many have become so brazen and venal that with the enormous wealth accumulated from these sources they have bribed, debauched, bought, and sold legislation to such an extent as to become a distinct menace to the very welfare of the nation. The American people are at last awake to this, and are already striking some telling blows at this system. They will, moreover, win ultimately in the contest, but the delay has cost an enormous price already, and has been of such a nature that the battles to be fought will be much harder against interests, now so thoroughly entrenched, than they would have been had our awakening come earlier. As to the cause of the above-mentioned tendency in Britain, I dare say that this same force or element, though especially in the past, has had some influence. But a cause greater than this, and the cause that operates chiefly today, is to be found in one of the most fundamental of British characteristics, and in the English perhaps more than the Scotch, the Irish, the Welsh namely, the regard for, which becomes at times an enslavement to custom, convention, precedent, and the methods and institutions of the past, and his reluctance to push on and out of these into the new, even when it would be greatly to his advantage so to do. In this the Americans have the advantage. It is a very great advantage, and to it is due much of the progress we as a people and as a nation have made. The fact that we are a comparatively new country is, it must be admitted, the chief reason why we are unhampered and unfettered by the old customs and traditions and precedents and caste systems, that exert their blighting influences so often upon agencies of progress in many of the older countries. In this, as a newer country, we have the advantage, and that it is an advantage only those quite intimately acquainted with the two sets of conditions are able fully to appreciate. It is the opposite of those characteristics that have given birth to and have preserved for so many generations, even centuries, the caste system in Britain, which is, in some of its aspects, almost, if not quite, as fully marked as in some of the older countries in the East. With us the chief evidence of a caste division, or would-be division, is that established on the basis of great, or shall we say excessive, wealth. But this is as yet by no means fixed, contrary to the ideas of many in Britain and many among those intelligently and sympathetically interested in American affairs, and it will yet be broken, or if it continue always to exist, it will be, as it already is, quite self-constituted, and will be given but little real recognition by the rank and file of American citizenship. True, we have our 400 in New York, and our would-be 400s also, both here and in other great centers, and there is much snobbery in evidence among them. But they are self-constituted, and the balance of our citizenship outside some of our newspapers pays but little attention to them, and certainly does not look up to them, or pay them homage. It does not ape them, or cringe before them, nor has it any desire to do so. But the truth of the matter is there is more snobbery among many of the old families, the titled families, both old and new, in Britain, with the splendid exceptions that one is only too glad to recognize, than there is among the above-mentioned class among us. This may to a Briton seem to be plain speaking. But this is a book of plain speaking, and it would be quite impossible to deal with matters in any other country in terms of speech any more plain than objectionable features and institutions in our own country have been dealt with, as the reader who has been sufficiently interested to follow the preceding chapters in this volume will have abundantly perceived. I am, moreover, dealing at length with this matter because it is so fundamental a characteristic of British nature, as it manifests itself even in matters of government, that a comprehension of it is essential to an understanding of present social, economic, educational, and religious delinquencies, as well as features of excellence, in modern British life. To be concrete and to the point, let me mention but one British characteristic that illustrates somewhat the point in question. There is scarcely any charitable or public organization of importance in Britain, scarcely ever a bazaar or benefit held in connection with any such, scarcely ever a cornerstone laid in connection with any building belonging to such, but the patrons or patronesses of the same many times as figureheads, it must be admitted are persons of title, from the ranks of the nobility. Now, in America we should have a supreme contempt for ourselves if we thus toadied to rank or title, we should insult the intelligence of our people if we put such sanction of a worthy cause before the cause itself, if we asked our people, like so many sheep, to follow another because it carried a bell. We would feel it to be all right for sheep, whose nature it is to follow the belled one, but not for people of an order of intelligence and discernment superior to that of sheep. True, we sometimes have as the heads of such organizations, or on their boards of directors, well-known people, but people in practically every case who have become well-known and influential through their own native qualities and efforts, and through these alone, just as so distinguished a man, for example, as Alfred Russel Wallace is president of the British Land Nationalisation Society, and just as other well-known men of similar type are at the heads of, or prominent in, other organizations, or movements that will readily come to the mind of the British reader. But when it comes to an undue recognition, or a sort of worship of, or deference to, any person chiefly because such person bears a title or kindred distinction of whatever nature, when it comes to a false idea of the superiority of such a person, the average American draws the line. There are two ways in which these artificial distinctions and divisions of society will cease. In the first place, you will stop making them through the conferring of titles, and in the second place, the larger men, those of the larger power and worth, the truly great, and hence the really deserving, will no longer accept them. The man of this type will recognize the fact that the acceptance of such an artificially created distinction cannot make him any greater or more deserving of honor, but, on the other hand, it can make him less so, for the large and truly great man is the one who will allow no fences to be built about him which will separate him from the common lot of his fellows, who is never exclusive, but always and abundantly inclusive. All sensible men have a greater admiration for Gladstone in that his finer manhood asserted itself, and enabled him to resist such blandishments. No title or artificially conferred rank could have added a particle to the man the whole world honors and admires as Mr. Gladstone. And what title or rank would have added anything to a Charles Dickens, a William Morris, a John Ruskin, or a John Bright? And how unnaturally anything of the kind would have fitted such men? And to go back somewhat further and carry the matter to its logical conclusion, what should we think of some such prefix afflicting the name of William Shakespeare or that of the Scots' own priceless possession, Robert Burns, as well as all others of their kind, for that? It has come to pass that scarcely a man can be unusually successful in business, or show himself particularly generous to the welfare of his fellow men, or achieve any unusual distinction in letters or science or art, without some species of fence in the form of some distinction being thrown around him, thus shutting him off to a greater or less extent from the great common people to whom he naturally belongs, and association with whom has helped to develop the qualities whereby he has been able to attain success or achieve merited distinction. It may not be so bad in the case of a man of merit being given some distinction that ends with himself, though the very large man and the one who stands as a representative of the coming type of man will not accept even this. But when it comes to conferring titles and distinctions that are hereditary, it is positively bad and condemnable, and especially so in the face of the new spirit of democracy that is now being born, and that is breaking down the impeding and worn-out barriers of the old Britain, and giving us the new. If there is still need for distinction to be conferred, let it be something like membership of the Privy Council, which confers the prefix Right Honourable. Let it be given guardedly, so that it will carry with it a true dignity and a definite and reliable meaning. This is now often given as a distinction to those who have deserved well of their country. There is no one who would object to it, and there is no harm that could result. But hereditary titles simply honeycomb society with senseless, artificial distinctions and barriers, and produce always a greater or less brood of young snobs to follow. They have no place in the life of a virile, advancing, democratic nation at this day and age of the world's progress. The Homan in the Making. Edwin Markham, in the September, 1906, Cosmopolitan. Of the difference between party bosses, a writer in The Interpreter's House, in the American Magazine, says, a cynical old acquaintance of mine, whose large corporation practice brought him into close contact with practical politicians, once said that the only difference between the party bosses was that the Republican bosses were bolder and more efficient and the Democratic bosses came cheaper. The three greatest general needs of country life, as discovered by President Roosevelt's Country Life Commission, and as summarized by him in a special message to Congress are: first, effective cooperation among farmers, to put them on a level with the organized interests with which they do business. Second, a new kind of schools in the country, which shall teach the children as much outdoors as indoors, and perhaps more, so that they will prepare for country life, and not, as at present, mainly for life in town. Third, better means of communication, including good roads and a parcels post, which the country people are everywhere, and rightly, unanimous in demanding. To these may well be added better sanitation, for easily preventable diseases hold several million country people in the slavery of continuous ill health. There is probably no man whose efforts and whose influence in the advancement of this great cause have been greater than have those of Mr. Carnegie. It is one of the three things with which his name will always be linked. Am I attributing undue importance to this matter? Yes and no. If dealing with it as an institution in itself, separate from its real connection with the national characteristics that produce it and still keep it alive, then yes would be the answer. I am dealing with it at length, however, because it affords a very concrete connecting link between the characteristics of the old and slowly dying and the new and rapidly growing Britain. And as I view it in connection with many others, the parliamentary election of 1906 marks the dividing line between the two. In other words, the day of democratic or truly representative institutions, hence of the people, has arrived, the day when the people will attend to their own affairs in government, and will not allow this most important of all functions to be assumed by others. It has been getting ready now for many years, but the entrance of the Labour Party into the Commons marked the actual visible transition from the old to the new. Britain herself scarcely yet realizes what the event really signifies. True, the Lord Mayor's show will continue for some time yet. The King, with the accompanying pageant, will for some time yet ride in the old state coach to Westminster for the opening of Parliament. But the young King doubtless laughs to himself at the whole proceeding, for he realizes that, although it now means nothing, the people still enjoy it, and if they are willing still to pay for it, it is all quite harmless. The lords will still assemble in their old chamber for a little while longer, but their power will surely be reduced to a shadow before these pages are through the press. The peeresses and other ladies of rank will for a while longer bedeck themselves in their finest jewels, fabrics, furs and feathers, and will issue forth to occupy their places in the peer's chamber at the state opening. But even these will all have an end, and the Lord Mayor's coach and even the old state coach will someday be used no longer for their present purposes, but will be well taken care of in some public museum, to remind the people of the things of the past, and such things are not by any means to be despised, for out of the things of the past the things of the present have evolved, just as out of those of today, however imperfect or perfect they may seem, the things of the future and still more perfect are to evolve. But the things of the past belong to the past. Blessed, moreover, is the people and the nation capable of fully realizing that today is a new day, and it must be accompanied by the things that are its own. Every people, it goes without saying, has its peculiarities, its strange combinations of characteristics. One of these strange combinations in the Great Britain of today, as it manifests itself in public, civic, or national life, is the fact that it is so extremely conservative, so wedded to what has been, so loath to do other than to follow this, while it is much more so than we are. It is yet in advance of us in so many ways in connection with which we can take most valuable lessons, some of which I have endeavored to point out in the preceding chapters. But there is with it all a desperate clinging to the old, and where there is a pushing ahead, it is too often necessity's push that compels it. True, this gives a certain solid national element or characteristic which Britain to an unusual degree unquestionably has, but the losses, nevertheless, outnumber the gains. But the new Britain that is being born, the Britain of the new democracy, the Britain of greater equality of opportunity, the Britain in which the great common people that has made the best of her that is today will be henceforth the chief factor in the administration of her affairs. This Britain has reached the point where it will move forward unhampered by old traditions and by the old conservative and at times reactionary forces in power as never before. It has reached the point where it will move along these lines more rapidly during the coming 10 years at least, so far as visible beneficent results are concerned, than it has moved during the past half-century. True, in the transition a good many things will be, or will seem to be, torn from their moorings, and the heretofore high standing, without much basis in reality to stand upon, will wonder what is taking place, and will be compelled, however reluctantly, to take their rightful, though many times more subordinate, places. Some will look on and cry out even with alarm. No, it is just the dawn of the new day, the people's day, hand in hand with the new democracy for which all the preceding ages have been getting ready, natural and healthy and all-powerful. No power, however great, can prevent it, nor would any far-sighted individual endeavor or wish to prevent it, or even to stay it. To try to do so, moreover, would be as foolish and as ineffectual as the proverbial broom in the hands of the old lady in her miscalculated attempts on the ocean's shore. With the entrance of this new and long-needed force into Parliament, and its increasing entrance also into various town and county councils, there will be some displacement, there will undoubtedly be some errors committed, perhaps even some excesses, but they will be mistakes of the judgment far more than of the heart, and with due vigilance on the part of all they will be righted, and lessons will be driven home that will make this new and continually increasing force an ever greater agency for justice and for a continually enlarging equality of opportunity. Moreover, such errors and such excesses have been for so long, and to an extent so much greater on the other side, that some degree of both on the part of the new should not cause undue impatience or unjust or hasty condemnation. With patience and due watchfulness all things of this nature will in time get finally adjusted and righted. The Labour Party, small as it is, though steadily growing, it was the only party in England that gained at the general election of December, 1910, has already fully justified itself. There is at the present a dearth in able leaders. Mr. Lloyd George, the author of the famous land tax budget, the outspoken orator of Limehouse, has perhaps the making of a great popular leader. Whether he will fulfill his promise, time alone will reveal. Apart from him there is at the present time no really strong, able, compelling leader in or out of Parliament. Hence, this new people's movement is essential for the continued and unhampered advancement of the nation. If into the ranks of the Labour Party some more middle-class members be elected as distinct from trades unionists, so that the party will be assured of growing continually broader in its general outlook, so as always to hold the highest interests of the entire nation in view, as it proposes and considers measures in connection with its own and its constituents' welfare, in brief, if it resolves firmly not to allow itself to take one-sided, partisan, or class views in matters pertaining to legislation, and if wise and discreet and far-seeing to a fair degree in its movements, there can be no limit set to the tremendous good that will be accomplished. The reforms promised by the ministry returned to power in December, 1910, will have a far-reaching effect. It cannot be doubted that the veto of the House of Lords will go, and with it the fear which has in the past paralyzed the forces of reform. No liberal ministry hitherto could take a bold line, could legislate save in response to vehement and repeated popular demands, because of the sure and certain knowledge that their labor would be in vain, and the hereditary House would veto their proposals. With this incubus removed, the prospects of progress are bright. But the government also promised payment of members and of election expenses. And in England, for obvious reasons, the alternative vote, the modern substitute for second ballot, must inevitably follow, as otherwise, under the existing system, the Progressive Party would be broken by contending factions. It is not easy to foresee what effects these great changes will have. The electorate may prove to be more favorable to labor and to extreme radicalism, or it may show itself more conservative, in the proper sense of the word, than at present. All that can be said with certainty is that changes will come. Payment of members and of official election expenses will open the representative chamber to a class hitherto in the main excluded for lack of means. Young men with brains and able to express their ideas will have a chance against elderly businessmen who have made a pile. The position may be further complicated by the inclusion of women in the electorate, though experience elsewhere shows that the immediate political effect of enfranchising women is usually imperceptible. The two great problems in Britain today, as I view it, the two that tower above everything else needing immediate and most profound attention, are what may be termed her land problem and her education problem. It is difficult to tell which is the more important of the two, so fundamental and so far-reaching are the influences of both. Shall we give brief attention to the latter first? In saying that Britain has a most important problem in the form of an education problem, I mean something quite different from and far more fundamental than the Church's connection with the schools, which in recent years has claimed so large a share of the attention of her people. This, though of some importance, is in a sense but an incident of the great fundamental question to which she must give her attention, if she is to continue to fulfill the high destiny which it is still in her power to fulfill. An education bill on the line of that rejected by the House of Lords in 1906 is the desire of a large section of the Liberal Party. But the difficulties in the way of change are considerable. The Acts of 1903-4, though strongly opposed at the time, are proving highly satisfactory, and temperate men of all parties are by no means anxious to reopen a tiresome and highly controversial question. No doubt the time will come and should come when every vestige of direct connection of church with state will be severed, since the truly great nation is the nation where there is complete independence of the church and the state. But her real education problem is an urgent need for a complete reconstruction of her educational system from the very foundation up. For men of the caliber able to effect such a reconstruction is the call of the hour. While, As already stated, there are many things of value which we in America can learn from Britain, many things that we can imitate with great gain. Here is a feature in which Britain can well take a lesson from us. Our great American public school system is perhaps one of the finest elements of our civilization, one of the things of which we can be justly proud, as it is also one of the chief factors in, or one of the chief causes of our growth, development, and continual advancement as a nation. That we have been sufficiently fortunate in the beginning to be free from any church or established religion, and have not been hampered by any ultra-conservative or reactionary influences that the representatives of such, with rare exceptions here and there, have become so proverbially and so justly noted for, is undoubtedly one reason for the place we occupy in this respect. In America there is no young man or woman of ambition and energy, and with a fair degree of health, however poor or humble he or she may be to start with, who cannot get, and successfully, the best primary, grammar, high school, college, university education, and subsequent professional training, that could be desired if he or she is willing to make some sacrifices at the start, and has the necessary pluck and perseverance. And by this I mean an education equal in every respect, and in some respects superior to, that which the son or the daughter of the wealthiest or the most notable can obtain. With us a young man is not hampered with the old tradition that one has to follow the work or calling of his father, who in turn followed that of his father, and that it is difficult for one born in humble circumstances or of parents engaged in a lowly type of work, to rise out of these circumstances. On the contrary, every tradition, every example, every imaginable agency points him upward and onward. In his earlier years he receives entrance into our public school system on exactly the same footing as the son of the Supreme Court or cabinet minister, or even of the president. Then as time passes, depending entirely upon himself, he may take rank above and be held in higher esteem and honor than the sons of these. In other words, it is this element of democracy, where the son of the laborer and of the cabinet minister are received on an equal basis, the one with an opportunity equal to that of the other, that characterizes more than anything else the educational system of America. This is one of the reasons why the great majority of our ablest, most valuable, and most honored men, from our former lamented President Lincoln down, in every line of calling and profession, have been as boys and young men thrown upon their own resources, because the sons of parents in so-called humble walks of life. That may be all right in America, I hear it said, as I have so frequently heard English parents say, but not for our sons and daughters here in England. Very well, so much the worse for England, and so much the worse for your sons and daughters. While I admit the justice or the part justice of your statement, it at the same time indicates or amounts to an admission that there is something radically wrong in your system, and something that cries loudly for some wise type of reconstruction. British education as it stands today, needs to be made more alive, more up-to-date, and abreast of the times. It needs a certain vitalizing influence such as can never be given it through any church or denominational influences, but such as it will get only from a more deeply and vitally religious, ethical, humane infusion, coupled with a greater independence of thought and a greater spirit of continual advancement, this from the primary school up to and through the university. Then, also, it needs a more fully established and a continually growing technical education on the lines of some of the excellent polytechnic, scientific and technical schools and colleges that now exist in and about London, and the provincial universities which have recently been established in nearly all the great manufacturing cities. In a country so adapted and so naturally inclined to manufacturing, with an abundance of such schools fully equipped, we should see in a comparatively short period of time whether Germany and America, for example, would still lead Britain in capturing the bulk of the new, as well as so many of the older, markets of the world. Then, in a country so splendidly adapted to the contented, happy life, and to the best efforts of the small farmer, more professional and scientific schools, chiefly agricultural and horticultural, should be established and brought to their highest degree of perfection, and gradually increased in their scope and their number. Especially is this true in a country where, on account of certain long-existing adverse conditions, its farming industries have been so crippled and have so declined that as a result its butter now comes chiefly from Denmark, France, Russia, Australia, and New Zealand, its eggs from Denmark, Belgium, Germany, and France, its cheese from Canada, Holland, United States, and New Zealand, and its vegetables from France and Germany. This enumeration, moreover, is but a partial record of those things that lie well within the scope of Britain's agricultural possibilities, and in connection with which she should be able to compete with any other country in the world. It says nothing of those products she imports in such large quantities, in connection with which her climate and general conditions do not allow her to compete so favorably, such as grain and larger fruits, chiefly apples, from Canada, United States, Australia, and other countries. Something, however, has been done in the last few years. The Small Holdings Act of 1907 has led to a revival of interest in the problem of getting the people back to the land. 6,000 or 7,000 smallholders have already been established on something under 100,000 acres of land, purchased or hired by county councils for the purpose, and the figures are being increased every month. But this brings us naturally to the second of the two great needs of the Britain of today, the solution of her land problem. The great estates and great holdings, of whatever type, must in some way be broken up and given back to the use of the people, from whom such enormous tracts should never have been taken, and for whose use now at least they in all justice should be made over. How these large estates or holdings in single hands, or how most of them at least came about, all familiar with Britain's early history know full well. The time was when it may have been comparatively right, because the population was such that the land in most cases was not needed, but it is not right now, and the very principle itself should now be held obnoxious, as, indeed, it is already coming to be so regarded. When a single individual can hold for himself and away from the use of the bulk of the people, and especially in a country of comparatively small area, thousands or 10 of thousands of acres in a single tract, in one case 30,000 acres, in another case 84,000 acres, in another 300,000 acres, and still another 1,350,000 acres, the evil is palpable. When, as in the case of the holder of one of these larger tracts of whom I know, and perhaps in the case of all the inmates of their kennels, are infinitely better kept and fed than many hundreds of thousands of Britain's citizens, not only in London and other large centres, but also in the villages and wide ranges of rural districts, the incongruity of such an economic state and the enormity of the injustice coexisting with it, must appeal to even the crudest intellect. This is especially true when the present owners have done in many cases absolutely, and in other cases practically nothing to earn or to deserve such holdings. And when at this day and age a single individual can own some 600 acres within the very limits of the county of London, coming into possession in the same manner, and again doing practically nothing to earn it, we have food for thought. Moreover, we should never allow ourselves to lose sight of the fact that the enormous values of holdings such as these have come, not through any particular efforts of their possessors, but primarily through the daily workaday life, the sacrifices, the suffering, the toil of all the people, whereby growth and steadily increasing values come, while the owner does little else than take his income, or receive his rents and his tolls, at the hands of his managers. In a former chapter I have spoken of an estate, very large in area, which I once passed by in a tramping trip of some 200 miles in North Britain. It was our purpose on this trip to get intimately into the lives of the people in the villages and the country districts. We therefore avoided hotels and inns as much as possible, and stopped with the people on the farms and in the small villages whenever we could. In this way we gained much information of a very concrete and accurate nature, in addition to the pleasure of knowing more intimately these good, admirable, and honest-hearted people. There was, on the other hand, one type of information which we were able to impart and which was received with such a degree of surprise on their part as almost to astonish an American, as it would also a Canadian or an Australian. When in rather a matter-of-fact way we spoke of the American farmer owning his farm of 80 or 160 or whatever number of acres, of his crops from which he received the full returns, of his developments and improvements in connection with his farm and home from year to year, they could scarcely realize the full import of what we were saying. That a man could own his own farm, clear and independent of any claims from another, except the taxes he paid to his school district, his village, and his state, that he could plan and make his own alterations and improvements, that he could plan, plant, gather and market his own produce, without consulting another, or without dividing one penny's worth with any other person, they were scarcely able to credit. And it was only later, when we in turn realized that we were talking with people, the representatives of a class numbering many hundreds of thousands, who could never hope to own a home, or even imagine owning a home in the district in which they live, who in the very houses in which they lived could scarcely drive a nail without the permission of someone else. It was only then that we realized their difficulty in comprehending our real meaning. Recent acts for the taxation of urban land values, and of unearned increment, and the small holding and housing acts are steps, small steps, in the right direction, but much more needs to be done, and unless the general land and farming conditions along these and other lines are speedily remedied in Britain, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and America will get large numbers of her more enterprising men and families, and especially many of the best of her young men, even more rapidly than they are getting them already. This will be to Britain a distinct and a continually increasing loss, in respect to some of her most desirable citizens, as well as economically and industrially. I am aware that in some of the larger estates parts of the land are not suitable for agricultural purposes, but the great bulk of it is, and in any case, as already stated, the very principle of such large tracts of land in a country of comparatively small area being held in a few hands and away from the people should in these days be regarded as wholly injurious and indefensible. The time has arrived when the land must in some way go back into the hands of the people. It is not within the scope of the few pages of this chapter to consider how this shall be done. That there is no problem of greater importance at the present time for the nation to face squarely and at once, and to deal with in an abundantly broad, fair, and wise manner, all thoughtful people agree. That the matter will be so dealt with, that fairness and justice will be done to all concerned, I am fully confident. The various land nationalization societies have done and are doing much to awaken public opinion, and the fact that there is so much agitation, so much thought and discussion already, indicates that these very great problems are to be solved, only the solution must be not unduly delayed. It does not seem advisable, in a volume already perhaps too long, to deal, except by way of mere mention, with other pressing problems in Britain. The matter of the large armies of men out of work that has become a chronic problem in London, as well as in practically every large centre, is so intimately connected with the land and rural districts problem as almost to deserve classification as a direct outgrowth, at least in great measure, from the latter. The large numbers that year after year have been driven or have drifted away from the rural and the farming districts, on account of the hard, adverse, discouraging conditions that prevail so universally there, and into the already congested centers, indicate how intimately the one pressing problem is connected with the other. There are two features, and these also more or less intimately associated with the matters we have just been considering, in connection with which Britain seems to be unusually, if not almost criminally, slow her workhouse system as at present constituted and administered, and the senseless, brutal, economically wasteful retention of her system of imprisonment for debt. The latter she should have reformed at least 50 years ago. May she speedily abandon it now? The former is a matter far more difficult to deal with. In a former edition I expressed the hope that some wise and far-seeing person or persons might soon appear to take hold of, grapple with, and bring about some radical and beneficent changes in connection with the system. That wish has been in part realized. Both the reports of the Royal Commission are valuable, but the Minority Report outlines the greatest scheme of reform that England has seen since the Education Act of 1871, and the wise promoters of that report are leaving no stone unturned to secure the passage of its proposals into law. There are two other lines along which Britain is advancing with such good, hard, common and business sense, as to merit the greatest commendation: the matter of better housing for large numbers of her people where it is so greatly needed, and the matter of old age pensions. The former is a tremendous problem, or rather undertaking, and at any given time the progress made in connection with it may seem to many to be very slow, and even discouraging. The excellent gains made so far, however, will be a great aid in seeing it through to its completion. The very large aid that will be given in the matter of better housing in the country and rural districts, following the speedy and wise solution of the land problem, must be apparent to all. The latter, which came into operation in 1909 and was further extended in 1911, has proved an incalculable boon to thousands of veterans of labor. In concluding this chapter, there is another matter which is so prominently to the front today that it may be wise or unwise depending upon one's point of view to revert to it. I mean the question of woman's or universal suffrage. That the basis of the claim now so universally made for it is economically sound gives promise that it may prevail, that the principle underlying it is one of pure and absolute justice is the indication of the fact that it will prevail. That the brave, intelligent, earnest bands of women who are making their heroic fight fully understand this fact, their determined purpose, even with the sacrifices they are being driven to make, fully indicates. The time will come, moreover, when they will be held in great honor, even by those, or by most of those, who now look on some with bitter antipathy and others with great or with mild derision, and if not by all of these, then by their descendants. The methods of the militant section have provoked much hostility, and are only defended by extreme partisans. But agitators often make mistakes, and it is highly probable that the principle and the right for which they contend will be won, even more speedily than most of us now realize. 11. The life of the higher beauty and power individual national. To be at peace. To be happy. To live in contentment. To have a satisfying and harmonious a successful life. This echoes the longing of perhaps every normal person. The fact that it so echoes a universal longing, indicates, to me at least, that it should be the natural, the normal life. In order to live a harmonious life there must be something to be in harmony with, and here as I view it is the great secret of life and its successful and satisfactory fulfillment. That there is a spirit of intelligence and of love in the universe, no normally constituted mind, and one that has lived at all near the higher revelations that may have come to it, can for a moment doubt. There is a power, beneficent if worked in harmony with, that pervades and through the channel of great and definite systems of law governs the universe and all that is in it. Every decade we are discovering new laws and forces, and the latter seem to be all the time finer and finer in their nature. This is perhaps on account of the process of evolution, so developing, so unfolding us, that we are getting nearer and nearer to the essence, the inner nature, the soul of things. What was the actual beginning of things no man knows. Nor is it essential or important that we do know. But in the beginning, as now, was being, self-existent and all-pervading the spirit of infinite life and power that is back of all, working in and through all, the source, the life of all. This seems to be a self-evident fact, infinite being projecting itself into existence, therefore the spirit, the substance, the life of all there is. Various terms or names are used by different minds, but to me this infinite being is God. To know this as our source, the very essence of our being, and from which or from whom we can be cut off, can separate ourselves, only to our detriment, is to recognize ourselves as spiritual beings, it is to be born into the spiritual life, and the spiritual life is the life eternal. Thus we come to know God in the degree that we realize that in Him we live and move and have our being. In the degree that we live in the realization of this truth, does this spirit of infinite life and power reveal itself to our consciousness more and more, and it is in this way that we grow and unfold in the spiritual life. It is through great systems of law, definite and immutable, that God or infinite being works. To know these laws, and to live, to work in harmony with them brings peace and harmony, willfully to violate them brings inharmony and struggle and suffering. They all work together for good. To live in harmony with them can bring us only good. To fail to recognize or willfully to violate them brings necessarily the opposite of good, namely evil. Evil has its origin properly speaking not in God, but from a violation of the laws, shall we say, the ordinances of God. To realize that in essence, though not in degree, we are one with the life of God, and then to open ourselves, our minds and our hearts, so that a continually increasing degree of the God life can manifest itself to and through us, is to understand more and to come into a continually greater harmony with the laws under which we live and which permeate and rule in the universe with an unchangeable precision. It is through our non-recognition of the life that is in us and the laws by which all things are governed, in other words, living out of harmony with the laws under which it is decreed we must live, that inharmony and evil with its consequent pain and suffering and despair enters into our lives. There are those who have lived so fully in the realization of their essential oneness with the divine life, that their lives here have been almost a continual song of peace and thanksgiving. As individuals' expressions of being projected into existence, we are given the power of choice. We can choose to open ourselves so fully to the realization of the source of our life, and open ourselves so fully to its influx, that we will find the attributes of this life manifesting, incarnating themselves more and more in our lives, so that in time we take on more and more the wisdom, the insight, and the powers of this life. In this way we are gradually changed from the natural to the spiritual, from earthmen to God-men, thus fulfilling the undoubted purpose of our being divine self-realization, and the returning to that from which we came. Coming as babes, returning as fully grown spiritual beings, gaining our experience in contact with this material world through the agency of the material body, and for some purpose of which we do not yet know but that shall be revealed to us in due process of time. What it is, cannot concern us materially now. This will come when we are ready for it. To know the laws under which we are living and to bring our lives into an ever completer harmony with them, is what concerns us now. Step by step, in this, as in all things. But to know God's laws is first to know the life of God in us. To live then in harmony with these laws and thus to reap the results that follow naturally and unerringly from this course, is the part of the wise. To separate ourselves from the life of God, to lose therefore the guiding wisdom that is its attribute, to fail to live in harmony with these laws, and to be battered and buffeted about as is invariably the result of the violation of law, until through this hard process we are finally driven into harmony with the laws of God, is the part of the unwise, the fool. The laws will have obedience, and there has never been a man or a woman powerful enough or rich enough or unique enough to violate them without suffering sooner or later the inevitable results. Many have sought to do so but have learned their lesson in sorrow, in anguish, in humiliation. We go voluntarily and of our own accord, or we are pushed and taught through suffering. God will have obedience. To know God is to know His laws, for His laws are written in the heart of man. By dwelling continually in this life of God we come into that condition where we are led more and more by divine guidance, where the divine wisdom and power and life so manifest and illumine our being, and through this our understanding, that we know more and more to do the right thing at the right time, and for such, to know is to do. While the end of life is not attained through intellectual processes alone, the mind, the intellect nevertheless is a means to this end. It is through the mind that the connection is made between the human and the divine. It is through thought operating through the channel of the mind that we are able to realize and keep our connection with infinite being, our source. It is by virtue of the mind, working through the brain, that we are connected with the material, physical universe. The body is material, physical. Every particle of it, through the food we take, is from the earth and the air, and to the earth and the air every particle of it finally returns. To realize that the body is not the self, but the instrument by which the self is temporarily related to and made able to live in a material world for the purpose of experience, growth, development, is a great aid in arriving at the realities of life. The folly then of giving supreme attention to it, and the things that pertain to it. To give it sufficient attention to enable it to become the clearest, the soundest, the most perfect instrument, that it can be made and kept for the real self to use, is the part of wisdom, for it is the true middle ground. Now, why this, I hear it asked, in a book of this nature? In order to get a basis in religion, in philosophy, in reality, for life, for the individual life, and as is the individual life so is the national life, never higher, never lower. As Dr. Patton, formerly president of Princeton University, once said to a class of young graduates, religion is the goal of culture, and the educated man must stand in some relation to God. He must have some philosophy of human life, some theory of society. And as Milton has said, there is nothing that makes men rich and strong but that which they carry inside of them. Wealth is of the heart, not of the hand. And as Mazzina once said, where there is no vision the people perish. The chase for the material has of late years become so great and so absorbing, whether by fair means or foul, that it has become one of the notorious features or characteristics of the time. And while I believe the heart of the people and the heart of the nation is sound, by virtue of the vastly superior numbers of splendid, honest, unpurchasable, and high-minded men and women among us, both old and young, a strong materialistic tendency is nevertheless a marked characteristic of the time. As there is perhaps no greater truth in connection with human life than as a man thinketh in his heart so is he, and also, that we grow into the likeness of those things we most habitually contemplate, also, that all life is from within out, for as is the inner, so always and necessarily will be the outer, it becomes clearly apparent how essential it is that the right center or basis of life be established. We hear it often said, and said in the most well-meaning way, that the physical, the material, is the basis of life. Now I would put it in another way, a safer and I think a truer way. The spiritual is the basis and the end of life, and the physical, the material, is the channel through which it manifests and works and unfolds and masters. The latter is not to be despised or slighted, but to be used, to be wisely used, but to be subordinated to its proper place. Thus it becomes a great blessing and helper rather than a hindrance and a curse. To have an abundance of the world's goods is good if rightly used, but to make the accumulation of material things the chief object of life can end only in disappointment. Such have but a pinched and stunted life which is unsatisfactory and empty of joy to themselves, and, except by way of warning, is of but little if any value to the world. Each one must find a center for life from which all radiates, or, putting it in another way, a basis, a foundation upon which all else is built. Such a center or such a basis, one that is true and satisfactory, is earnestly longed for by myriads of people. An instinct for the religious life is born in practically every human soul. So many great chunks, as the years have passed, have fallen away from our theological systems, and so many are still continually falling away from them, that it is hard or well nigh impossible for an earnest, mentally honest man to find any satisfactory or even acceptable basis for the religious life there. Such in common with all others will find that the uniform teaching of all the most inspired teachers in the world's history, whatever the religion or system of belief has been, is that the essence, the substance of all true religion is the consciousness of God in the soul of man. The rational basis for this I have endeavored to point out in the early pages of this chapter. In him we live and move and have our being. In what a homely, splendid way John Tauler has put it in the following. I have a power in my soul which enables me to perceive God. I am as certain as that I live that nothing is so near to me as God. He is nearer to me than I am to myself. It is part of his very essence that he should be nigh and present to me. And a man is more blessed or less blessed in the same measure as he is aware of the presence of God. God made us for himself, and our hearts are restless until they repose in him, was St. Augustine's way of putting it. The only death to be feared is unconsciousness of the presence of God, said Paracelsus. That the divine life and energy actually lives in us is inseparable from religion, was the keynote to the philosophy of that most spiritual of philosophers, Fichte. An insight into the absolute unity of the human existence with the divine is certainly the profoundest knowledge that man can attain, said he again. It was the most inspired who has yet lived among us who said, neither shall they say, lo here, or, lo there. For, behold the kingdom of God is within you. And again, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. It was he who gave the substance of the moral law and therefore the essence of religion as love to God and love to the fellow man. To me, love to God is this dwelling continually in the conscious living realization of the essential oneness of our life with the divine life, seeking to have no other will than that the divine will may manifest to and may work through us. How significant then thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, and also, in all thy ways acknowledge him and he shall direct thy paths. How truly in the light of this truth does Fichte say that the expression of the constant mind of the truly religious man is this prayer, Lord, let but thy will be done, then is mine also done, for I have no other will than this that thy will be done. And how thoroughly in keeping with thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee is his thought in the following. Whatever comes to pass around him, nothing appears to him strange or unaccountable. He knows assuredly, whether he understand it or not, that it is in God's world, and that there nothing can be that does not directly tend to good. In him there is no fear for the future, for the absolute fountain of all blessedness eternally bears him on towards it, no sorrow for the past, for in so far as he was not in God he was nothing, and this is now at an end, and since he has dwelt in God he has been born into light, while in so far as he was in God, that which he has done is assuredly right and good. His whole outward existence flows forth, softly and gently, from his inward being, and issues out into reality without difficulty or hindrance. Love to the fellow man is the realization of the fact that we are all parts of the one great whole, that the source and essence of life in each is essentially the same, that love is the established law of life, and that the law will have obedience or it will strike its punishment upon all who do violence to it. He that loveth not his brother, abideth in death, said the master teacher, and this is simply the enunciation of the law that's written deep in the universe and that is immutable in its workings. All beings are the fruits of one tree, the leaves of one branch, the drops of one sea. Honor is for him who loveth men, not for him who loveth his own, says the Persian. Truly we are all parts of the one great whole, and one can't suffer or have injustice done him without all sharing in that suffering, and none more than the author of that injustice. It was by virtue of his perceiving so clearly the laws in relation to human life that are so immutable in their workings, that enabled and prompted Jesus to give anew to the world an epitome of the laws relating to all human relations when he said, "And as ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise." It is what is ordinarily termed the Golden Rule. I have never seen any wiser or more suggestive commentary upon it than the following, by the late Honorable Samuel Milton Jones. As I view it, the Golden Rule is the supreme law of life. It may be paraphrased this way: as you do unto others, others will do unto you. What I give, I get. If I love you really and truly and actively love you, you are as sure to love me in return as the earth is sure to be warmed by the rays of the midsummer sun. If I hate you, ill-treat you, and abuse you, I am equally certain to arouse the same kind of antagonism towards me, unless the divine nature is so developed that it is dominant in you, and you have learned to love your enemies. What can be plainer? The Golden Rule is the law of action and reaction in the field of morals, just as definite, just as certain here as the law is definite and certain in the domain of physics. I think the confusion with respect to the Golden Rule arises from the different conceptions that we have of the word love. I use the word love as synonymous with reason, and so when I speak of doing the loving thing, I mean the reasonable thing. When I speak of dealing with my fellow men in an unreasonable way, I mean an unloving way. The terms are interchangeable absolutely. The reason why we know so little about the Golden Rule is because we have not practiced it. Yes, what we term the Golden Rule is an absolute law of life, and it will have obedience through the joy, and therefore the gain it brings into our lives if we observe it, or it will have obedience by the pain and the blankness it drives into our lives if we violate it. As we give to the world, so the world gives back to us. Thoughts are forces, like inspires like and like creates like. If I give love, I inspire and receive love in return. If I give hatred, I inspire and I receive hatred. The wise man loves, only the ignorant, the selfish, the fool, hates. It is the man who loves and serves who has solved the riddle of life, for into his life comes the fullness, the satisfaction, the peace, and the joy that the law decrees. He it is who is the wise man. The man who has no sense of service to his fellow man, whose idea is primarily gain for himself, whether honorable or dishonorable, is the supreme fool in life, by virtue of his ignorance leading him into the violation of a law that condemns him to a pinched, a stunted, sunless, joyless life. If the gatherer gathers too much, says Emerson, nature takes out of the man what she puts into his chest, swells the state but kills the owner. Nature hates monopolies and exceptions. We do well when we remember this: one can never do an injury to another without in some form or another suffering for that injury himself. Why? It is so written in the law of the universe, that's all. And we likewise do well to remember one can never do a real loving, unselfish, kindly act without deriving a benefit from such act himself, and if at any time there are apparent exceptions to this, it is, I believe, because our limited vision does not enable us to see the total relationship of human actions. No man in the world ever attempted to wrong another without being injured in return some way, somehow, sometime. The only weapon of offense that nature seems to recognize is the boomerang. Nature keeps her books admirably, she puts down every item, she closes all accounts finally, but she does not always balance them at the end of the month. Asterisk. As the life of a man is of more value to him than the house in which he lives, so the possession and growth of the faculties that enable him to enjoy the things that pertain to and that spring from the inner life, are of more value to him by way of bringing him happiness and contentment than any possible accumulation of material things. Wealth is good as a means to comfort, good as a servant, never as a master, good as a feature, never as the chief end of life. One of the most pitiable sights that I know is the way some very rich men die. Let the following serve as the type of many. A man has made gain money getting the chief object of his life. In time, shall we say through nature's abhorrence of abnormalities, the greed for gain becomes his master and dries up his very powers of enjoyment of the finer things in life. He accumulates 100 million, with all the care and worry that keeping this invested to the best advantage means. He is of but little use to the world, and through the dwarfing of the finer qualities of his life, and the drying up of his powers of enjoyment, he has also become so to himself. He dies. 3 months after he has gone, his name is scarcely ever heard, except perhaps in some long drawn out or bitterly fought will contest. His end is like that of a dog. In short, many a dog, faithful and intelligent and useful, has been more genuinely mourned and longer and more gratefully remembered. And then if it is true, as I believe it must be, that we commence in the other form of life exactly where we leave off here, taking with us only what we have gained by way of soul growth and spiritual unfoldment, but not 1 cent, and having, moreover, No further control over any material possessions. How poor, how pitiably poor is such a life. Contrasted with the following as an ideal and a purpose for a life. I am primarily engaged to myself to be a public servant of all the gods, to demonstrate to all men there is goodwill and intelligence at the heart of things and ever higher and yet higher leadings. These are my engagements. If there be power in good intentions, in fidelity, and in toil, the north wind shall be purer, the stars in heaven shall glow with a kindlier beam that I have lived. And what a life was the life of this man Emerson, who deliberately chose this as his part. And what an influence while he lived, and truly for all time to come. Not 3 months, nor 3 centuries can forget his name or cease to bless his memory. Another, in whom success in the sense of excessive gain develops pride and an itchiness for ostentatious show, builds a mansion, a home, costing $4 million, thinking also that it will be a sort of monument to, a reminder of, himself. Within 50 years, or within even a much shorter period of time, it may be the possession of a Barnum and the home of a good up-to-date circus. Such is the security of a man's hold upon material possessions. And how few seem to be able to stand success and remain good, healthy, sensible, normal men. It seems strange that so seldom can a man become successful as to either wealth or power without taking on, mentally at least, the strut of the turkey cock. A really great man, however, is always immune from this affection. It is rather as Pope said, of all the causes which conspire to blind man's erring judgment, and mislead the mind, what the weak head with strongest bias rules, is pride, that never failing vice of fools. The law seems to be absolute in that whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Nature seems to abhor an abnormally developed pride, snobbery, too marked a consciousness of superiority. And to the I am holier than thou feeling, she applies always the brand, hypocrite, and she burns it deep. Another makes the accumulation of material things the chief object of his life, rising from humble circumstances, possessing unusual abilities, but giving but an infinitesimal amount of these abilities to his city or his state, both badly in need of such service, but rather conspiring with their enemies to make special privileges for a few greater, to secure acts alienating valuable properties from the people of his city and state, to avoid a just share of taxation, thereby defrauding and throwing greater and unjust burdens upon all of his fellow men, except upon those equally dishonest and contemptible in this same practice of tax evasion. His life here closes considerably before a normal and well-rounded life should close, and on quitting he directs that practically the entire results of his life work go to a couple of young grandsons, not yet in their teens, in order that the family name and business be preserved. Every man, said Marcus Aurelius, is worth just so much as the things are worth about which he busies himself. The business may be preserved or it may tumble into ruin. Nature deals so in mockery when a man fancies he can have a controlling hand in the final actual disposition of his material possessions. The family name may be preserved and it may be raised even to a higher esteem, or it may be preserved in the records of an inebriate asylum. A man can have an actual say only in regard to his own life, but never in regard to the life of any other. Not by ambition and gain alone for self, but by labor, incessant and devout, to raise earth to heaven, to realize, in fact, the good that as yet exists only in idea, that is the end and purpose of human life, and in fulfilling it we achieve and maintain our unity each with every other, and all with the divine. Many a rich man's son has found a handicap of great riches too great to allow his making even a decent success of life. The incentive which nature seems to have decreed as a healthy and strength-developing stimulant has been neutralized by the burden which an over-rich father has dumped upon him. Ungirt loins, unlit lamps, unused talents, sink a man like lead. Doing nothing is enough for ruin. Many a daughter of the unduly rich has found her associations, as also her training or lack of training, of such a nature that undue pride or a false ambition has taken possession of her, robbing her of one of the chief charms of womanhood, and a designing or worse than empty marriage has fallen to her portion. Surely wealth is of the mind and the heart and not of the hand. And the man who makes as his life work only gain for self, and who fails to recognize his inexorable relations with his fellow men, fails completely in getting from life what he thinks he'll get, for he finds that what he gains turns to a greater or less extent to ashes in his hands, and what he bequeaths to his descendants is far below what it might be. He or she who is at all worthy of receiving such bequest would rather it be a few millions less and be accompanied with a name of honor and a memory to be revered, than that it come with the tremendous handicap it many times comes with. As we come to a fuller appreciation of these facts and of the laws of human life and relations that will not be denied, then more and more will we measure the degree of civilization not by accumulation of the means of living, but by the character and value of the life lived. Now I have said naught, nor would I say aught, against wealth. I believe in wealth sufficient for all the legitimate comforts of life, and I believe in it so thoroughly that I plead for a state wherein it can become the portion of a much larger number than has ever yet been known. And while I do not share in the belief that our time is necessarily more materialistic than other times have been, I do realize and most keenly that the economic conditions during the past few years have produced a class of men so materialistic in their entire outlook, so insatiate in their greed for ever larger gain, so drunk with opportunity and power, that they would pull the very pillars of the state to the ground, if a united and determined people did not come forward and say, so far, and no farther. It is against the aggressions of these and the abuses we have permitted them to give birth to and fatten upon, the aggressions of these against the welfare of their fellows, against the economic and political institutions of the nation, that we must battle for some time to come with an alertness, with a determination and a bravery that can know no defeat. With a mind calm and determined and with malice towards none, must these great battles for the redemption of this nation be fought. And as excessive wealth is of no real value to any man nor to his descendants, but becomes more often a veritable curse, and as it makes its possessors many times a menace to the very welfare of the nation and to the welfare of every man, woman, and child in the nation, we will be doing a twofold service through such warfare and subsequent vigilance, in saving its possessors and its would-be possessors from their own folly, as well as conserving our own common interests. It's the middle ground that carries with it the satisfactory solution of life. Excesses have to be paid for with heavy and sometimes with frightful interest. Life, the life of everyone has its perplexities, its problems, its struggles and its work to be done. Humanity is brave, and there are but few who do not stand up like men and women, some almost like very gods, to the end. It certainly should be the aim of each to throw no hindrance in the path of any fellow being, to make no load heavier, but rather to lend a hand whenever we can. Oh, the skies are blue and a ribboned road. Shall the pilgrim's heart beguile? Yet hurry not so fast with your load. For there is many a mile. And it's here a friend and there a friend. To bear your hand a while. But none will go to the journey's end. And few will stay the mile. And in connection with the problems and perplexities and apparent losses that come and that must be met as the days hurry away, I believe without the question of a doubt, that the time will come when we will see the part that each thing has had to play in our lives, and we will give thanks that it came just as it came. I believe, moreover, that a sort of an inborn universal feeling of this nature is a reason why humanity is brave. A hope that never wearies, a faith that defies defeat, an attitude of mind that compels gladness, will help us to stand like men until we realize this glad culmination. And if one would find the easier way, it lies in the ever-conscious realization thou wilt keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee. The end.